In the desolate silence of Antarctica, where the winds howl and the ice stretches endlessly, a secret may lie buried beneath the frozen surface. An ancient beacon designed to survive millennia. Imagine a signal not meant for the explorers of today, but for a future generation to uncover. What if this beacon was placed long ago by a forgotten civilization, its purpose not to guide ships, but to preserve knowledge, waiting patiently for the right moment to be understood? What if the key to unlocking this mystery lies in an unlikely connection? A lost group of warriors, the Knights Templar, whose mission was far greater than anyone realized. The cold does not arrive all at once in Antarctica. It creeps in quietly, seeping through layers of clothing, sinking into bone, stealing sensation before the mind can register pain. The horizon stretches endlessly, a flawless white curve beneath a sky so pale it feels unreal. There are no landmarks here, no trees, no ruins, no obvious signs that humanity ever belonged in this place. And yet, beneath this silence, beneath miles of ancient ice that has not seen sunlight in hundreds of thousands of years, something may be waiting. Imagine a light that was never meant to be seen by human eyes. Not a flame, not a beacon in the traditional sense, but a signal deliberate, patient, and enduring. A marker placed at the far edge of the world, not to guide ships through stormy seas, but to guide something far older through time itself. The unsettling question is not whether such a thing could exist, but why anyone would build it here, in a land that seems actively hostile to life. Antarctica has always carried the weight of the unknown. Long before explorers set foot on its frozen surface, it existed as an idea, a blank space on the map that invited speculation. Ancient philosophers believed the world needed balance, that a great southern land must exist to counterweight the continents of the north. Medieval scholars copied these assumptions into maps, passing along a concept rather than a certainty. But some maps went further. Some showed coastlines beneath the ice, rivers, mountains, shapes that should not have been known. These maps are often dismissed as coincidences, misinterpretations, or lucky guesses. And yet, the question lingers. Guessed by whom and based on what? Antarctica was officially discovered in the 19th century, but hints of its form appear centuries earlier, drawn with an accuracy that becomes harder to ignore the closer one looks. To accept that is to accept something more disturbing, that knowledge can be lost, not just gained. That history does not move in a straight line, but in cycles of remembering and forgetting. Now imagine medieval men, knights sworn to poverty, obedience, and secrecy, carrying fragments of that lost knowledge. Men who traveled farther than most of their contemporaries could imagine. Men who guarded roads, treasures, and pilgrims, but who also guarded something else. Information. The Knights Templar are often remembered for their wealth, their sudden fall, their dramatic destruction. What is less discussed is how strange their rise truly was. How quickly they went from obscure warrior monks to an organization powerful enough to frighten kings. Power like that rarely comes from swords alone. The Templars were collectors of relics, of manuscripts, of languages, of ideas. They operated across borders at a time when borders meant everything. They built structures aligned not just with the land, but with the sky. Their symbols hinted at geometry, measurement, and orientation, concepts that feel oddly out of place in an age supposedly defined by superstition. It is as if they were working from a different set of priorities, guided by something older than doctrine. And then, just as abruptly as they rose, they were destroyed. On a single morning in October 1307, the machinery of Europe turned against them. Arrests were coordinated, accusations pre-written, confessions extracted under torture. The charges were bizarre. Heresy, idol worship, secret rites that sounded more symbolic than criminal. To modern ears, the trial records feel panicked, almost desperate, as though authorities were grasping for reasons to justify an outcome already decided. Whatever the Templars were accused of, it was not what truly frightened their enemies. The fear lay in what they knew. In the days before the arrests, Templar ships vanished from French ports. No records say where they went. No wreckage was ever found. For an order known for meticulous accounting, this absence is striking. It suggests preparation, not chaos. Escape, not collapse. The idea that they fled has lingered for centuries, whispered in legends that place them in Scotland, Portugal, or the far north. But there is another possibility, one so extreme it is often dismissed before it can be examined. What if they went south? To even suggest medieval ships reaching Antarctic waters sounds absurd. The conditions are brutal, the distances immense. But history has a habit of underestimating what determined people can achieve when motivated by belief, fear, or obligation. The Templars were not ordinary sailors, and they may not have been traveling blindly. Knowledge of currents, winds, and star paths, passed down from sources now lost, could have made the unthinkable merely dangerous, not impossible. And danger was something the Templars understood. If they believed that something of immense importance existed beyond the known world, something worth preserving at all costs, then Antarctica becomes less a wasteland and more a vault. Ice does not rot. Ice does not erode in the way wind and water do. Ice waits. A structure built there would not be seen, touched, or altered for centuries. It would not need guards. Time itself would protect it. This is where the idea of a beacon emerges, not as a tower of fire or stone visible across frozen plains, but as a signal encoded into place, position, and alignment. Something that does not broadcast constantly, but waits to be recognized. A marker designed not for the medieval world, but for a future moment or a returning one. To understand why such a beacon might exist, one must turn to a name that sounds like myth but refuses to stay buried. Hyperborea. In ancient Greek texts, Hyperborea was a land beyond the north wind, a place of eternal light, long life, and harmony between humanity and the cosmos. It was described not as a fantasy realm, but as a distant homeland remembered rather than imagined. Over time, Hyperborea drifted from geography into symbolism, becoming a metaphor for a lost golden age. But metaphors often begin as memories. What if Hyperborea was not simply north, but polar? And what if the poles themselves were not always where they are now? There are theories, controversial, debated, and far from settled, that suggest Earth's orientation may have shifted in deep time. If so, lands once temperate could have become frozen, and civilizations could have been erased not by war, but by climate. In that scenario, Antarctica would not always have been the barren expanse we know today. It could have been green, habitable, and central rather than peripheral. If a civilization had existed there, advanced enough to understand astronomy, geometry, and planetary cycles, it might have anticipated its own disappearance. It might have left markers, instructions, or signals, designed to outlast ice ages and cataclysms. And those signals would need caretakers, guardians who did not fully understand what they protected, but understood enough to know it mattered. The Templars may have seen themselves as those guardians. This reframes their story entirely, not as greedy bankers or secret heretics, but as custodians of a burden passed down through fragments. Texts without context, maps without explanation, symbols without keys. They may have believed their role was temporary, that one day the knowledge they preserved would be reclaimed by those it originally belonged to. A return, not a discovery. And so the beacon would wait. The unsettling power of this idea is not in proving it true, but in recognizing how well it explains the silences in history. Why certain knowledge appears fully formed, then vanishes. Why some questions are never answered, only ridiculed. Why the most remote place on Earth is also the most regulated, the most inaccessible, the most protected from casual curiosity. Antarctica today is governed by treaties that emphasize peace and science. No nation owns it. No military activity is allowed. Officially, nothing of historical importance lies beneath its ice. And yet, vast regions remain unmapped in detail. What lies beneath is inferred, not seen. The ice keeps its secrets well. As the wind howls across the polar plateau, it is easy to believe that nothing has ever stood there, that the silence is natural, eternal. But silence can also be intentional. A pause stretched across centuries. A message not meant to shout, but to endure. If there was a beacon placed at the end of the world, it was never meant for us. Or perhaps it was meant for us but not yet understood. And that raises the most disturbing possibility of all. Not that history is wrong, but that it is incomplete. That beneath the stories we tell ourselves about progress and discovery lies a deeper narrative, one that suggests humanity has been here before, has known more than it remembers, and has lost more than it realizes. Standing at the edge of the frozen continent, staring into a white horizon that seems to erase all meaning, one cannot help but wonder whether the emptiest place on Earth is empty at all, or whether it is simply waiting for memory to catch up with time, and for a light long hidden to finally be seen again. Long before the world was mapped in precise coordinates, before compasses and sextants guided explorers across oceans, the human imagination wandered to lands beyond reach. Among these imagined realms, few held as persistent a fascination as Hyperborea. To the Greeks, it was a land of impossible beauty, lying far to the north, beyond the reach of the north wind, eternally bathed in sunlight, untouched by disease, conflict, or decay. It was described as a place where people lived longer than in the known world, where harmony reigned between humans, nature, and the stars. To some, it was myth, a poetic ideal. But to others, scattered through centuries, it was memory masquerading as myth, a remembrance of something once known and long since forgotten. The earliest texts speak of Hyperborea almost casually, as if the land existed simultaneously in imagination and history. Herodotus mentions a people who worshipped Apollo, living at the edge of the known world, sending offerings to the temples of Greece. Pindar and other poets elaborate, portraying Hyperboreans as a civilization advanced beyond the ordinary measure of humanity, almost divine in their wisdom and longevity. They did not just survive, they thrived, existing in a rhythm the rest of the world could not comprehend. And yet, every account agrees that they were distant, remote, almost unreachable. Their disappearance, or at least their retreat into legend, was swift, leaving behind tantalizing traces that whispered of something greater. For medieval scholars, Hyperborea represented more than a lost utopia. It became a philosophical lens through which to view the cosmos. Maps of the time often depicted this northern paradise as a real place, sometimes aligned with mysterious mountain ranges, rivers, and celestial points. Scholars argued over its latitude and the plausibility of its existence. Some treated it as allegory, others as geography. Its persistent reappearance in maps, writings, and chronicles suggests that its memory refused to die, passing from Greek philosophers to Roman historians, then to Christian monks copying ancient texts in monasteries. Hyperborea, like a shadow in the snow, lingered in human consciousness, slipping between history and imagination, always slightly beyond reach. What is remarkable is how this myth adapted to the changing understanding of the world. As medieval Europeans began exploring farther north and encountering harsh, unforgiving climates, the idea of Hyperborea shifted. It became a memory of what had been lost, rather than what might be found. Scholars began speculating that Hyperborea existed not merely beyond the north wind, but beyond human reckoning, perhaps a place the earth itself had moved, or that had vanished beneath ice and snow. In this way, the myth took on a strangely prophetic quality, anticipating knowledge that science could only later confirm. What if entire lands had been swallowed by glacial cycles? What if civilizations had flourished in places now uninhabitable? The memory of Hyperborea, preserved in poetry and story, could be seen as a faint echo of truth buried beneath time. Ancient myths often carry fragments of something real, hidden beneath layers of allegory and symbolism. Hyperborea was no exception. Across different cultures, there are hints of a golden age, a northern homeland, a place where humanity once lived in harmony with the cosmos. Norse legends spoke of lands to the far north, sometimes associated with gods or supernatural beings, that resembled aspects of Hyperborea. Similarly, some Celtic traditions reference distant realms beyond the known world, places of eternal light and abundance. While these stories were separated by geography and language, the parallels are striking. Could it be coincidence? Or were these cultures remembering the same ancient homeland? The consistency of these myths over millennia is difficult to ignore. By the time the medieval world had fully formed, Hyperborea had taken on a layered identity. It was no longer just a northern paradise. It became a symbol of lost knowledge, of civilizations predating recorded history, of wisdom that humanity had once possessed and then forgotten. It was the archetype of what some historians later called antediluvian memory. Memories of worlds and peoples that existed before catastrophic shifts in climate, tectonics, or human development. And because the myth was anchored in the north, it suggested a deliberate migration or disappearance. Hyperborea, it seemed, had not simply vanished. It had moved, or perhaps its people had, carrying fragments of their knowledge into regions unknown to history. It is this idea that draws the Templars into the story. For centuries, the order was shrouded in mystery, their motivations often obscured by the more sensationalized accusations of heresy, greed, and political maneuvering. But the more one examines their history, the more it appears that their reach extended beyond Europe's borders in subtle, almost invisible ways. The Templars were not just warriors. They were seekers of knowledge, preservers of forbidden or endangered truths. They possessed texts in unknown languages, maps drawn with impossible precision, and architectural designs that aligned with celestial patterns far beyond the practical needs of worship or defense. It is tempting to suggest that, through fragments of Hyperborean memory preserved in antiquity, the Templars may have been guided toward ideas and locations that had long been erased from common knowledge. Hyperborea, in this sense, was not merely a place on a map. It became a compass of thought, an intellectual and spiritual orientation that directed the actions of those who understood its significance. To the Templars, and perhaps to others before them, Hyperborea represented the pinnacle of human achievement. A society in tune with the stars, the earth, and the mysteries of life itself. Its memory was a warning, a promise, and a guide. If the legends were more than myth, then the location, alignment, and knowledge associated with Hyperborea would be of immense importance. To preserve it would be to preserve the possibility of returning to it, of reclaiming a lost world. And so, Hyperborea became both literal and metaphorical. For some, it was a destination, a place to reach across ice and ocean, perhaps even through the centuries. For others, it was a state of knowledge, a way of seeing the world in harmony with unseen laws and patterns. Its dual nature, both geographic and conceptual, made it compelling to groups like the Templars, who operated at the intersection of faith, power, and secrecy. To follow Hyperborea's trail was to walk a path that challenged conventional understanding, a journey through myth that demanded belief in the impossible, tempered by rigorous attention to detail. But the farther one travels in this exploration, the more unsettling the implications become. Hyperborea was not just a story preserved in texts. It was a living thread woven into human consciousness, appearing at times of crisis, curiosity, or awakening. Cultures separated by oceans and centuries seemed to echo the same memory, even if they never communicated directly. Some of these echoes survived in maps, others in rituals, architecture, and astronomy. The Templars, whether intentionally or unconsciously, appear to have traced these echoes, following a pattern that few others recognized. In doing so, they may have ventured farther than most scholars are willing to acknowledge, into lands that had not been walked in centuries or even millennia. The possibility that Hyperborea once existed in regions now submerged under ice or ocean raises questions that modern science is only beginning to address. Geological and climatological studies reveal that Earth's surface has shifted dramatically over long periods, and ice sheets have advanced and retreated with cataclysmic effect. Entire ecosystems, and potentially entire civilizations, may have been buried beneath layers of ice, preserved in a frozen silence that defies decay. If Hyperborea was real in some form, its disappearance may not have been mythic but environmental, a casualty of forces far beyond human control, yet remembered in the stories and symbols passed down through generations. This memory, carried across centuries, is what makes Hyperborea extraordinary. It is not merely lost land. It is lost knowledge, embedded in the fabric of human culture, waiting for someone or something to recognize it. And it is precisely this idea that allows the Templar story to intersect with Antarctica. If memory, myth, and preservation are intertwined, then a place like the southernmost continent, isolated, extreme, and preserved by ice, becomes a plausible repository for the remnants of Hyperborean wisdom. The alignment of geography, legend, and historical behavior suggests a deliberate intention, a plan that stretches across centuries and continents, linking the North and the South in ways that traditional history struggles to explain. Hyperborea, then, is more than myth. It is a key, a thread that connects the dreams of ancient poets, the calculations of medieval scholars, and the secretive journeys of those who operated in the shadows of history. Its story challenges conventional timelines and assumptions, asking difficult questions about what humanity has lost and what it might still recover. To engage with Hyperborea is to engage with the possibility that history is not a linear narrative but a palimpsest, with truths written, erased, and overwritten across millennia. It is to accept that myth can be memory can be guidance, and guidance can survive in the most unexpected forms, from texts and maps to symbols hidden in plain sight. As the memory of Hyperborea unfolds, it begins to influence perception. The familiar world feels incomplete, its certainties shaken by the knowledge that entire civilizations could vanish yet leave traces that refuse to be ignored. The land beyond the north wind, once dismissed as poetry, now whispers of something tangible, something that may have shaped human understanding long before recorded history began. It becomes not just a story to be read, but a puzzle to be solved, a signal that persists across time, waiting for the right observer to follow its faint yet persistent light. The enduring allure of Hyperborea lies in its dual nature, both lost and present, distant and immediate, mythical and historical. It is impossible to grasp fully, yet impossible to ignore. Its presence in the human imagination suggests that the memory of a lost world is more persistent than even the harshest climates or the longest centuries. It reminds us that history is never complete, that the stories we inherit are fragments of larger truths, and that some secrets are encoded not just in stone or parchment, but in the very fabric of culture itself. In this sense, Hyperborea is not just a place, but a compass pointing toward something beyond the ordinary, something that challenges perception and invites exploration, even today. Long before the first ship charted the icy shores of Antarctica, the continent itself existed as both mystery and suggestion in human consciousness. For centuries, maps depicted the edges of the known world, vast white expanses that suggested emptiness or hinted at something more, something unseen. Scholars, explorers, and sailors speculated that a great southern land must exist, a counterweight to the continents in the north, a concept known as Terra Australis. But beyond speculation, evidence of Antarctica in ancient maps and documents raises questions that remain uncomfortable to dismiss. Certain depictions suggest not guesswork, but knowledge that, in theory, should have been impossible to obtain before modern exploration. The Pyrie Reis map, created in 1513, is perhaps the most famous of these puzzles. It shows the northern coastline of Antarctica as if it were ice-free, with rivers, mountains, and bays that would only be visible before the continent was buried under millennia of ice. Similarly, the Orontius Phineas map of 1531 depicts what appears to be the Antarctic continent in astonishing detail, its topography startlingly accurate. These maps predate any recorded landing on the continent by centuries. How could cartographers of the early 16th century have depicted features that were submerged under ice at the time? Were these simply extraordinary coincidences, or were they copies of far older sources, perhaps preserved through the same hidden networks that the Templars operated within? The idea that Antarctica was once ice-free is supported, in part, by geological and climatological studies. Long before humans arrived, the continent was home to forests, rivers, and life adapted to temperate conditions. Fossilized remains, pollen, and sediment cores indicate that, during certain periods, the continent's climate allowed ecosystems similar to those found in modern-day Patagonia or New Zealand. These findings suggest a dynamic planet, one in which ice sheets advance and retreat over tens of thousands of years, swallowing continents in white silence, and then releasing them to the world when conditions allow. If ancient civilizations had existed during periods when Antarctica was hospitable, their traces could have been buried beneath kilometers of ice, preserved but hidden from view. Some researchers argue that the accurate depictions of Antarctica on medieval maps are not mere coincidence. They suggest that knowledge of the continent existed long before European exploration, possibly passed down through oral traditions, secret voyages, or lost civilizations. The existence of advanced navigation and mapping techniques in antiquity, including the use of geometry, stars, and even magnetic orientation, would have made such feats theoretically possible, though extraordinary. If these maps were copied from older sources, it raises further questions about what knowledge might have been preserved and hidden, deliberately or incidentally, through the centuries. The notion that knowledge of Antarctica existed before its documented discovery challenges conventional history. It implies that ancient civilizations, or at least their emissaries, may have traveled far beyond the regions we typically associate with their activity. Perhaps the legends of Hyperborea, the northern homeland, and the mysterious southern lands are connected in a way we do not yet fully understand. A symmetry in human memory that spans poles and centuries. The Templars, with their reputation as preservers of forbidden knowledge, appear as logical intermediaries in this story. They had access to maps, manuscripts, and oral traditions, and they operated across borders and continents, from the Mediterranean to northern Europe. It is not entirely inconceivable that they would have encountered fragments of this lost knowledge and recognized its significance. To place Antarctica in historical context, one must understand the continent as it existed before the ice. It was a land of rivers and valleys, mountains and forests, blanketed in life. Imagine walking along its coastlines tens of thousands of years ago, feeling the wind off temperate seas rather than glacial plains, hearing the calls of creatures now extinct. This was a world that could sustain life, civilization, and knowledge, perhaps even enough to record its own existence. If advanced humans or other intelligent beings had thrived here, they would have had to contend with the planet's rhythms, adapting to cycles of warmth and ice, predicting long-term climatic shifts in order to survive. Their understanding of geography and astronomy could have rivaled or exceeded that of later civilizations, allowing their knowledge to travel through time, embedded in cryptic maps, symbols, and oral traditions. When explorers finally arrived in Antarctica centuries later, they encountered a frozen desert that seemed incapable of sustaining life beyond a small handful of hardy species. The stark contrast between what modern science now knows about the continent's ancient climate and the ice-covered land discovered in the 19th and 20th centuries adds a layer of intrigue. It is as if the continent itself had been erased from human experience, waiting under kilometers of ice for centuries, untouched, silent, and unclaimed. The possibility that it may have once been known to ancient navigators, preserved in secret maps and guarded by orders such as the Templars, turns the very notion of exploration on its head. Antarctica becomes not merely a destination, but a repository of memory, a time capsule, a silent witness to the passage of human history. Yet there is more to consider than geology and cartography. The psychological weight of Antarctica, the way its extreme environment inspires both awe and dread, cannot be understated. Its isolation is absolute, its climate unforgiving. For the human mind, this remoteness carries symbolic significance. A place removed from the ordinary flow of life, a place where secrets can endure without interference. It is the ultimate refuge for hidden knowledge. To choose this land as a site for preservation would be logical for those who understood the impermanence of human institutions, the vulnerability of cities and libraries to fire, war, and decay. Here, ice becomes both vault and sentinel, preserving truths until a time when humanity is ready, or daring enough, to rediscover them. And this is where the Templar connection deepens. The order was notorious for its secrecy, its careful collection and protection of manuscripts, relics, and cryptic symbols. Their commanderies often contained maps with unusual detail, orientated not only for local use but in ways that suggest broader, global knowledge. The possibility that some of these documents pointed toward the southern lands is tantalizing. It implies that the Templars may have recognized Antarctica not as a wasteland but as a potential repository, a place to leave a signal, a beacon, or perhaps even remnants of knowledge meant to outlast centuries. The consequences of such a possibility are profound. It reframes the narrative of exploration and discovery, suggesting that Antarctica was not discovered in the modern era but simply rediscovered. It forces a reconsideration of what knowledge has been lost, intentionally hidden, or overlooked. It also suggests a level of foresight in ancient and medieval civilizations that we are only beginning to appreciate. an understanding that human memory is fragile, that history is incomplete, and that certain knowledge must be safeguarded in extraordinary ways. Even today, the continent remains enigmatic. Despite satellites, research stations, and international treaties, large regions are still effectively unmapped in detail. Ice flows conceal mountain ranges, valleys, and possible structures beneath layers that can stretch miles deep. The idea that humanity has walked these lands before, or left traces intentionally for future generations, is no longer purely speculative. It exists at the edge of plausibility, occupying the same space as forgotten maps, unexplained cartographic anomalies, and the secretive movements of orders like the Templars. Consider, too, the human element. What drives a civilization to preserve knowledge in a place so inhospitable, so extreme? It must be more than fear or greed. It requires belief, faith in the survival of the message, faith that someone somewhere will understand its purpose. It demands patience on a scale few humans can comprehend, a commitment that stretches beyond a lifetime, beyond even centuries. Antarctica, in this sense, is not merely a landform. It is a testament to foresight, a monument to human understanding of time and endurance. There are whispers in history, hints that the southern continent may have been known to those willing to think beyond conventional limits. From the ancient Greeks speculating about lands beyond the horizon, to the Templars guarding maps and manuscripts with unusual care, to medieval scholars interpreting fragments of older knowledge, a pattern begins to emerge. This pattern suggests that Antarctica, far from being an uncharted wasteland, has long occupied a place in human consciousness, a place reserved for the extraordinary, the hidden, and the enduring. And so, standing in the mind's eye before the frozen expanse, one begins to perceive it not as a void, but as a repository. The ice is more than frozen water. It is a silent chronicle, a canvas on which history and myth have been written and preserved. The continent's silence is deliberate in its effect, inspiring awe, fear, and curiosity in equal measure. To gaze upon it is to confront the limits of human understanding, to recognize that our history may be far richer, far stranger, than the textbooks allow. In the end, Antarctica before ice is a land of possibilities. Rivers flowing where glaciers now crush the terrain, forests teeming with life where snow and wind now reign, and perhaps even evidence of human, or pre-human, civilization that has been buried beneath the unyielding cold. The idea that such a place existed, and that its knowledge could survive through the deliberate actions of secretive orders or lost civilizations, transforms the continent from a geographical curiosity into a narrative fulcrum. It becomes a place where myth, memory, and human ambition intersect, a stage upon which some of the greatest and most mysterious acts of foresight and preservation in history may have played out. This is the Antarctica that lingers at the edges of history, waiting silently beneath layers of ice and time, a land that invites not just exploration, but imagination. It asks us to consider that perhaps the stories we have dismissed as impossible might contain kernels of truth, and that what seems remote, frozen, and unreachable may have once been central to a far older human understanding. It is here, in this frozen silence, that the connection between Hyperborea, the Templars, and a secret beacon begins to take form. A thread stretching across time, geography, and human belief, leading us toward questions that remain, for now, unanswered. The Knights Templar did not begin as the legendary order that dominates the imagination of historians and conspiracy theorists alike. Their origins were humble, almost unremarkable. A small band of monks and warriors, bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, formed in the aftermath of the First Crusade. Their initial mission was simple, if perilous: protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, to shield them from bandits and hostile forces. But even in those early days, there was something unusual about the Templars. They moved with purpose, acted with precision, and seemed to carry an awareness of a world far larger than the one their contemporaries understood. Their growth, rapid and unprecedented, was fueled by more than piety or martial skill. It was fueled by knowledge, by vision, and perhaps by secrets older than the order itself. The first years of the order were marked by discipline and hardship. Life in the Holy Land was relentless, a daily confrontation with violence, disease, and the vagaries of war. Yet, for all the danger, the Templars found ways to organize, to create a structure that was efficient and far-reaching. They developed an early network of fortifications, commanderies, and communication channels that allowed them to move information and resources across vast distances. This network gave them power that few in medieval Europe could match, and it allowed them access to knowledge that was both practical and arcane. They collected manuscripts, studied foreign languages, and cultivated contacts with scholars and explorers. In many ways, they were as much scholars as soldiers, and it was this dual nature that set them apart from the other orders of the time. As the Templars gained influence, their role began to expand beyond simple protection of pilgrims. They became financiers, advisors, and custodians of treasures, both material and intellectual. Temples, chapels, and fortresses were constructed not merely for defense, but as repositories of knowledge and resources. Some historians have speculated that these structures contained more than money or weapons. They may have contained maps, codices, and relics of civilizations that had long vanished. The Templars' meticulous record-keeping and strategic thinking hint at an awareness of something greater, something that extended beyond the immediate concerns of kings, popes, or merchants. Their intelligence network stretched from the shores of the Mediterranean to the heart of Europe, gathering information that would have seemed incomprehensible to outsiders. One of the most enigmatic aspects of the Templars' rise was their obsession with certain sacred sites and symbols. Solomon's Temple, long destroyed, held particular fascination. The Templars dug beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, conducting excavations that remain shrouded in mystery. What they discovered is unknown, though legends abound. Treasures, ancient texts, or knowledge so dangerous it could alter the balance of power in Europe. These claims may be exaggerations or myth, but they point to a central truth. The Templars were not content with ordinary understanding. They sought knowledge with a fervor that rivaled their religious devotion, and they often kept their discoveries secret, fearing that revelation could bring ruin to both themselves and the world. This pursuit of knowledge took the Templars across borders and cultures, exposing them to ideas that would have been considered heretical or impossible in medieval Europe. They traveled through the Levant, encountering the remnants of advanced civilizations, interacting with scholars of diverse traditions, and collecting texts that preserved fragments of older, sometimes forgotten knowledge. Their libraries and treasuries became more than mere collections. They were archives of civilization itself, containing the seeds of ideas that could challenge conventional wisdom. It is within this context that the Templars' fascination with geometry, astronomy, and sacred alignment takes on a new dimension. Their architecture was not merely functional or symbolic. It encoded knowledge, orientation, and perhaps even maps pointing to lands beyond Europe. The Templars' combination of martial prowess, organizational skill, and esoteric curiosity made them uniquely powerful, but it also made them vulnerable. Their wealth and independence, coupled with their secrecy, drew envy and fear from kings, popes, and other authorities. Rumors circulated about hidden rituals, secret knowledge, and forbidden practices. Some claimed the Templars worshipped idols, engaged in blasphemous rites, or possessed objects of supernatural power. While many of these accusations were likely exaggerated, they reflect a deeper anxiety, that the Templars knew things that others could not understand, and that such knowledge threatened established hierarchies. This threat became all too real on a fateful morning in 1307. In a coordinated strike across France, the Templars were arrested, tortured, and accused of heresy. The charges were sweeping and bizarre, ranging from denial of Christ to obscene ritual practices. Confessions were extracted under extreme duress, and yet, even under torture, some Templars refused to reveal the secrets they had been entrusted with. It was not wealth, not political advantage, but knowledge that their enemies most feared. What could drive a monarch to destroy an entire order with such precision? What was so dangerous that it could not be allowed to survive? Historians have often debated the reasons behind the order's fall, focusing on politics and finances. But there is a growing body of thought suggesting that the Templars were guardians of knowledge far older than Christianity itself. This knowledge, encoded in maps, manuscripts, symbols, and perhaps in the very geometry of their buildings, was their true treasure. It may have related to lost civilizations, ancient technologies, or hidden truths about the earth and the heavens. The precision with which the Templars operated, the care with which they preserved and transmitted information, suggests that their actions were guided by something beyond immediate survival or temporal power. It is in this context that the possibility of a southern destination emerges. For centuries, the Templars have been linked to the north, Scotland, Scandinavia, even the Arctic fringes. These connections are real, documented, and fascinating in their own right. But a more radical proposition considers the south, a journey to the edge of the known world, to a continent that was only fully charted centuries later. If ancient maps, preserved knowledge, and secretive calculations suggested a habitable southern land, the Templars may have viewed it as a refuge, a vault, or even a place of initiation, a location where knowledge could be preserved beyond the reach of kings, inquisitors, and time itself. The idea that the Templars traveled south is provocative, and it challenges conventional assumptions about medieval capability. Yet it is not entirely implausible. The order possessed ships, navigators, and knowledge of currents and celestial navigation that few others in Europe could match. They were adept at secrecy, planning, and long-term strategy, which could allow them to undertake missions that seem impossible by the standards of the day. If the Templars understood the significance of a land buried under ice, or the existence of a beacon meant to endure beyond centuries, their actions would make sense within the logic of preservation. What is extraordinary is that their story aligns with ancient myths, such as Hyperborea, which speak of a homeland of wisdom and light, suggesting that the Templars may have been guided by legends older than Christianity itself. The human element in this story cannot be overstated. The Templars were not mythical beings. They were men of flesh and blood, bound by faith, loyalty, and curiosity. Their courage extended beyond the battlefield into the realm of knowledge, where discovery could be as dangerous as any sword. They understood the stakes. A misstep could mean death, exile, or the erasure of centuries of accumulated wisdom. And yet they persevered. This willingness to risk everything for the preservation of knowledge speaks to a vision that is as compelling as it is mysterious. It frames the Templars not simply as warriors or financiers, but as custodians of history, guardians of secrets meant to survive the ages. Their methods were meticulous. Commanderies were designed with precision, aligning walls, doors, and sanctuaries in accordance with astronomical observations. Manuscripts were copied with extraordinary care, sometimes encrypted, sometimes annotated in ways that reveal only partial meaning to outsiders. Symbols were hidden in architecture and art, signaling truths to those who knew how to read them. In this sense, the Templars were less a military order and more a sophisticated network of knowledge preservation, operating across borders and centuries, invisible yet omnipresent. The tension between secrecy and power defined the Templars' existence. Their knowledge made them influential, but it also made them vulnerable. Monarchs feared their independence. Popes feared their influence. When the order was finally dissolved, it was not just an institution that was destroyed, but a body of knowledge that was scattered, hidden, and perhaps deliberately buried. The sudden disappearance of the Templars from the political and social landscape of Europe leaves questions that remain unanswered to this day. What exactly did they know? Where did they go? And what fragments of their knowledge survived the centuries, preserved in symbols, structures, and perhaps in locations far beyond the continent itself? It is within this framework that the Templars' possible southern ventures take on significance. If they sought refuge, a place to preserve knowledge beyond the reach of earthly authorities, the southernmost continent becomes a logical choice. It is isolated, extreme, and inaccessible, yet geologically stable. Ice preserves rather than destroys. A vault built here would endure centuries, perhaps millennia, waiting for a time when it could be rediscovered. The idea is radical, unsettling, and compelling, suggesting that the Templars were not merely reacting to threats. They were planning for a future far beyond their own lifetimes, a future in which the knowledge of the ancient world might once again illuminate the human mind. In the end, the story of the Templars is not simply one of rise and fall. It is a story of vision, courage, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. Their legacy is encoded in maps, in architecture, and perhaps in the very myths that have survived the centuries. To follow the Templars is to follow a trail of curiosity and foresight, a journey that extends from the deserts of the Middle East to the frozen expanses of lands that few could have imagined. Their story challenges assumptions, defies simple explanation, and suggests that history is far richer and far stranger than the conventional narrative allows. The Knights Templar may have begun as protectors of pilgrims, but they became something far greater. Stewards of knowledge, keepers of secrets, and perhaps, unwittingly, architects of a path that leads to the edges of the known world and beyond. Their story invites us to reconsider what it means to know, to preserve, and to dream, and it raises questions that continue to echo across the centuries. What did they see that others could not? What did they understand about the world, the stars, and the hidden lands that remain, even today, at the edge of human comprehension? Beneath the sun-baked stones of Jerusalem, under the shadow of a temple that had already been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times, the Knights Templar began one of the most enigmatic chapters of their existence. Solomon's Temple, revered, mythologized, and long the subject of legend, was more than just a site of worship. It was a repository of symbols, knowledge, and power. For the Templars, the temple held a magnetism that went beyond religious devotion. It represented a threshold between the earthly and the divine, a place where human ambition and sacred design intersected, and where secrets of unimaginable significance might be buried, hidden in plain sight yet protected by layers of history and myth. The order's early members, despite their vows of poverty and humility, approached the temple not merely as soldiers or pilgrims, but as seekers of truths that could change their understanding of the world, and perhaps the world itself. When the Templars arrived in Jerusalem, the city was a crucible of faith, commerce, and violence. The Crusades had left their mark in stone and blood, and the Temple Mount, perched at the heart of the city, had been the center of spiritual and political contention for centuries. It was a place where empires clashed and dreams collided, and yet it also whispered of something older, something that predated the power struggles of the moment. The Templars, who had already distinguished themselves through discipline, bravery, and strategic intelligence, understood that the temple's value lay not only in its gold or relics, but in the intangible. The patterns, the alignments, the hidden meanings encoded within its architecture and foundations. Archaeological studies and historical records suggest that the Templars engaged in extensive excavations beneath the Temple Mount, though the exact nature of their findings remains shrouded in mystery. Some accounts speak of tunnels and vaults, passageways that led deep beneath the city, into chambers carved out of rock and earth. These subterranean spaces were said to contain relics, manuscripts, and artifacts, some of which may have originated long before the Templars themselves arrived. Legends whisper of golden vessels, sacred texts, and objects imbued with religious or symbolic significance, items that could illuminate knowledge lost to the wider world. The precision with which the Templars approached these excavations suggests a methodology that went beyond simple treasure hunting. They mapped, recorded, and preserved, treating each chamber and artifact as part of a larger puzzle, a code that demanded understanding before it could be revealed. What makes these excavations so compelling is not just what may have been found, but why the Templars pursued them with such dedication. Solomon's Temple had been described in the Hebrew Bible as a marvel of construction, a building infused with geometry, symmetry, and sacred symbolism. Every measurement, every orientation was significant, designed to align the human and the divine, the earthly and the cosmic. The Templars, with their fascination for geometry and star maps, would have recognized in the temple a kind of blueprint, a repository not only of faith but of knowledge. To them, the structure itself was a message, a signal encoded in stone and earth, meant to be interpreted by those with the insight and patience to read it. The Templars' work beneath the temple was not without danger. The tunnels were precarious, poorly lit, and prone to collapse, yet the order moved with methodical precision. They documented their findings, sometimes in secret manuscripts, other times in symbols hidden within their architecture across Europe. The depth and complexity of their work suggest a consciousness of risk and reward far beyond the simple accumulation of wealth. They were engaged in a long-term project, one that required foresight, discipline, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Each artifact, each chamber, each measurement was a piece of a larger narrative, a story that stretched across centuries and continents, connecting the past to a future that the Templars could only hope to influence. Speculation about the nature of what they discovered is both tantalizing and frustrating because it is so fragmentary. Some historians suggest that the Templars found evidence of pre-Christian civilizations, knowledge that had been deliberately obscured by time and tradition. Others argue that they unearthed relics of immense religious significance, artifacts capable of inspiring devotion, fear, or even power. There are whispers of lost technologies, maps that hinted at distant lands, or manuscripts containing knowledge of the stars, the earth, and human history that exceeded the understanding of their contemporaries. While much of this remains speculative, the very persistence of these legends points to a truth that is difficult to ignore. The Templars were not merely collecting wealth. They were preserving knowledge, often in ways that required secrecy, patience, and extraordinary foresight. The psychological and spiritual dimension of their work is equally compelling. Excavating beneath a site of profound sacredness is not a task for the timid or unreflective. The Templars operated within a worldview in which divine and earthly orders were intimately connected, and where physical spaces could embody metaphysical truths. Their labor was a kind of meditation, a discipline that required them to balance courage with humility, curiosity with reverence. The tunnels and chambers beneath Solomon's temple were more than stone and shadow. They were conduits to understanding, places where the boundaries of human knowledge and divine insight blurred. For the Templars, these spaces were not just physical. They were conceptual, ethical, and spiritual arenas where the stakes extended far beyond their own lifetimes. It is also worth considering the broader context in which these excavations took place. Jerusalem was a nexus of cultures, languages, and traditions. The Templars, traveling from Europe and encountering remnants of Byzantine, Islamic, and pre-Islamic civilizations, were uniquely positioned to access knowledge that others could not. Their access to the Temple Mount, combined with their disciplined secrecy and extensive networks, gave them opportunities that were extraordinary for the time. The idea that they were able to find, interpret, and preserve information that had been hidden for centuries is not implausible when one considers the combination of their skills, resources, and purpose. One of the most intriguing elements of the Templars' subterranean work is the suggestion that it was not merely local but had implications far beyond Jerusalem. Some researchers propose that the temple's measurements, alignments, and symbolic encodings contained references to distant lands, possibly even regions as remote as the poles. This idea, though speculative, gains weight when considered alongside the Templars' broader pattern of preserving and transmitting knowledge. Their commanderies across Europe often incorporated symbolic geometry, star alignments, and spatial relationships that suggest a sophisticated understanding of the world beyond immediate political or religious concerns. The Temple Mount, in this sense, could have served as both a source and a template, a central node in a network of hidden knowledge stretching across continents and generations. It is not difficult to imagine the impact that such discoveries would have had on the Templars themselves. For men bound by vows of obedience, humility, and faith, the encounter with knowledge so profound it could redefine understanding would have been both exhilarating and terrifying. Their decisions regarding what to preserve, what to conceal, and what to transmit would have carried immense weight. To reveal too much could invite destruction, persecution, or theft. To reveal too little could allow knowledge to fade into oblivion. The Templars' careful balance between openness and secrecy reflects a sophisticated understanding of human and institutional fragility, an awareness that the survival of knowledge often depends on patience, discretion, and strategy. The symbolic and possibly practical treasures they encountered beneath Solomon's temple may also have informed the Templars' later pursuits. Their fascination with sacred geometry, celestial alignment, and hidden paths suggests that their understanding of the temple's secrets was applied elsewhere. Structures built across Europe, from fortified castles to ornate chapels, often contain precise measurements, alignments with solstices and equinoxes, and symbols whose meaning is not immediately apparent. These features hint at a continuity of purpose, as if the knowledge uncovered beneath the Temple Mount became a blueprint for action, encoded in stone and earth for future generations to decipher. The mystery deepens when one considers what might have been intentionally hidden. Some legends speak of chambers sealed deliberately, accessible only to those with specific keys or knowledge. Others suggest that the Templars may have removed certain artifacts entirely, transporting them across continents or depositing them in secret repositories. Whether these legends are exaggeration or based on fact is difficult to determine. Yet the very persistence of such stories across centuries suggests that the Templars' work beneath the temple had significance far beyond the immediate or the visible. It was, in essence, a project of preservation, an attempt to safeguard knowledge that could endure the vicissitudes of politics, war, and time itself. What emerges from this history is a portrait of the Templars not simply as warriors or administrators, but as custodians of something extraordinary. Beneath Solomon's temple, they encountered more than stone and relics. They encountered a challenge that required intellect, patience, and moral judgment. They engaged with knowledge that could reshape understanding, and they made decisions that would resonate for centuries. Their excavations, meticulous and secretive, reveal a pattern of thought that combines curiosity, discipline, and foresight in ways that remain astonishing even today. The legacy of the Templars' work beneath Solomon's temple extends far beyond the immediate context of Jerusalem or the Crusades. It suggests a continuity of purpose that stretches into the unexplored, into places that humanity may not yet have fully understood or rediscovered. It raises the possibility that knowledge, carefully preserved and encoded, can survive in forms that transcend time, culture, and geography. In this light, the Templars' excavations are not merely historical footnotes. They are foundational events in a larger story of human ambition, memory, and foresight. They remind us that beneath the surface of the known world lies a depth of mystery, and that some truths, hidden and preserved, may endure far longer than empires, religions, or even civilizations themselves. The Knights Templar were more than warriors, financiers, or pilgrims. They were students of the cosmos, observers of the unseen, and interpreters of patterns that most people never noticed. Across Europe and the Holy Land, their commanderies and chapels were constructed with a precision that transcended mere functionality. Walls aligned with solstices and equinoxes, doorways oriented toward specific celestial events, and floor plans echoing complex geometric ratios all suggest a deep understanding of sacred geometry, a language that spoke not in words, but in the universal dialect of mathematics, proportion, and cosmic harmony. These patterns were not decorative. They were messages, deliberate, intended to encode knowledge across space and time, meant to survive long after the Templars themselves were gone. Sacred geometry was central to their worldview because it connected the earthly to the divine. In the medieval imagination, the universe was a reflection of higher order, and the physical world could be interpreted as a mirror of spiritual truth. Shapes such as the circle, square, and triangle were not just forms. They were vessels of meaning. The circle represented eternity and unity, the triangle symbolized the triune nature of the divine, and the square embodied earthly order and stability. By embedding these forms in architecture, the Templars were creating structures that spoke to both the mind and the soul, communicating with those who could read the language of symbols and angles. This was a knowledge that went beyond literacy, beyond conventional education. It was a form of insight designed to endure, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the initiated to recognize its significance. But sacred geometry was only one aspect of their sophisticated encoding. The Templars also worked with the stars, using celestial alignments to inform both construction and navigation. Temples, chapels, and towers were positioned so that sunlight, shadow, or starlight would fall upon specific points at precise times of the year. These alignments were not arbitrary. They required meticulous observation, mathematical calculation, and careful planning. The placement of stones and the orientation of walls became a means of recording astronomical knowledge, a subtle map of the heavens inscribed on Earth. Such precision could guide long-distance travel, indicate sacred times, or encode information about lands and regions far removed from Europe. In essence, their buildings became instruments of knowledge, each stone a note in a grand symphony connecting human understanding to the cosmos. The symbolic language extended to maps and charts. The Templars were known to collect and preserve manuscripts from a variety of cultures, including Arabic, Byzantine, and even earlier sources whose origins are lost to history. Some of these maps depicted distant lands with an accuracy that defied what medieval Europe was thought to know. Certain features, such as coastlines beneath ice, mountain ranges in the far south, or river systems long buried, appear in maps that scholars still puzzle over today. These maps suggest more than coincidence. They hint at access to knowledge that transcended borders and eras, preserved in secret by those who understood its importance. It is within this framework that the idea of a southern destination, perhaps even Antarctica, begins to seem plausible. The Templars may have viewed distant, uninhabited, or ice-covered lands not as empty wastelands, but as potential repositories for knowledge, safe from destruction and the meddling hands of kings or inquisitors. In addition to geometry and astronomy, the Templars encoded information in symbols, marks, sigils, and inscriptions whose meaning was accessible only to those trained in their interpretation. Some of these symbols appear repeatedly across Europe, from commanderies in France and England to chapels in the Iberian Peninsula. They include representations of stars, compasses, grids, and geometric overlays, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of navigation, mathematics, and sacred cosmology. While to outsiders these marks may appear decorative or cryptic, to those who could read them, they were instructions, warnings, or keys, sometimes literal, sometimes metaphorical. They offered a map to knowledge hidden in plain sight, a puzzle spanning centuries, waiting for the right observer to follow its threads. One of the most compelling aspects of this encoded knowledge is its potential connection to Hyperborea and distant lands beyond the familiar map. If the Templars had access to fragments of memory, myth, or earlier maps that hinted at a northern homeland or a southern refuge, then the combination of geometry, astronomy, and symbolic coding could have served as a sophisticated system for preserving and transmitting this knowledge. Alignment with celestial events could act as markers, signaling specific dates or conditions under which a location might be discovered or interpreted. Geometric patterns could encode distance, direction, or elevation. Symbols could indicate what was hidden, what had been preserved, and what needed to be safeguarded. Together, these tools created a multidimensional language capable of surviving centuries, wars, and the collapse of institutions. The Templars' approach to sacred geometry and astronomy also reflects a philosophy of time that is rarely appreciated. They were not merely concerned with the immediate present, or even with their own lifetimes. They operated with a temporal vision that extended across generations, understanding that knowledge could survive centuries if carefully protected and encoded. Their architecture, maps, and symbols were designed to endure, to communicate across the span of human history, to guide future seekers toward insights that might otherwise be lost. In this sense, the Templars were not simply preserving objects or information, they were cultivating continuity, ensuring that the memory of what had been learned could persist long after the political and social structures of their day had crumbled. Consider, for example, the recurring use of star patterns in their buildings. Certain chapels and commanderies feature orientations that correspond to solstices, equinoxes, or notable celestial events. Some scholars have noted alignments with stars in constellations historically associated with navigation or mythic significance, such as Orion or the Pleiades. These alignments suggest a deliberate attempt to connect human spaces with the broader cosmos, creating a dialogue between the heavens and earth. In a practical sense, such knowledge could assist in navigation or timing. In a symbolic sense, it could encode spiritual and philosophical principles, linking the Templars' work to ancient traditions that predated Christianity itself. The integration of geometry, astronomy, and symbolism also points to a level of sophistication that would have required specialized training and shared understanding within the order. Not every Templar would have had access to the full depth of this knowledge, and yet the structures and symbols were consistently applied across different regions. This suggests an internal curriculum, a system of instruction and secrecy designed to pass on knowledge selectively, ensuring that only those who were prepared could interpret the codes. The complexity of this system indicates that the Templars were working not only for immediate purposes, protection of pilgrims, fortification, administration, but also for long-term preservation of understanding, a mission that transcended ordinary temporal concerns. The implications of this approach become even more striking when considered in connection with the idea of distant lands, hidden beacons, and lost civilizations. If the Templars had access to maps or knowledge hinting at regions beyond Europe, they would have needed a method to preserve that knowledge without revealing it to those who might misuse it. Geometry, alignment, and symbolic coding provided precisely that method. By embedding instructions and markers in buildings, maps, and manuscripts, the Templars could ensure that knowledge would survive without being easily accessible. This method of preservation aligns with what we know about their secrecy. The Templars were careful, deliberate, and patient, operating on timescales measured in decades and centuries rather than months or years. It is also worth noting that the Templars' approach reflects a philosophical commitment to a holistic understanding of the universe. Their study of geometry, astronomy, and symbolism was not merely technical. It was a form of intellectual and spiritual engagement. They believed that the universe operated according to principles that could be understood, recorded, and transmitted, and that these principles were reflected both in the heavens and on Earth. By encoding this knowledge in their buildings and maps, they were creating a legacy that was both practical and transcendent, a way of ensuring that future generations could access insights that might otherwise vanish into time. The combination of sacred geometry, star alignment, and cryptic symbols also invites the possibility that the Templars were involved in projects far beyond Europe, perhaps even in the exploration or preservation of remote lands. The same skills that allowed them to encode knowledge in stone could be applied to navigation, to orientation in unknown regions, and to the marking of locations that might not be visited for centuries. In this light, the possibility of a southern journey, to preserve knowledge or signal future discovery, begins to make sense. It is not merely speculation. It is a logical extension of the Templars' methodology, a practical application of their understanding of geometry, astronomy, and the coded language of symbols. Ultimately, the Templars' use of sacred geometry and astronomy was not an eccentric hobby or ornamental flourish. It was a carefully constructed system of knowledge preservation, a language that transcended time, politics, and geography. Through their buildings, symbols, and maps, they encoded instructions, insights, and warnings, creating a network of understanding that could survive long after the order itself had fallen. This system reflects a vision of history and knowledge that is both profound and unsettling, suggesting that the Templars were not simply part of their time, but participants in a much larger project, one that may have included distant lands, ancient civilizations, and the preservation of secrets meant to endure across centuries. In contemplating the depth and breadth of the Templars' encoded knowledge, one begins to see the outlines of a narrative that connects Jerusalem to Europe, Europe to the poles, and perhaps even the present to a hidden past. Geometry, stars, and symbols were not ends in themselves, but tools for understanding, preservation, and communication. They reveal a mind that thought in layers of meaning, in timescales beyond the human lifespan, and in patterns that bridged the tangible and the intangible. To follow this path is to enter a world where knowledge is not measured merely by books or battles, but by the precision of angles, the alignment of stars, and the patient unfolding of coded truth across the landscape of history. Long after the Templars had established their strongholds across Europe and the Levant, whispers began to circulate about their secretive voyages beyond the familiar seas, journeys that extended far beyond the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coasts. These were not the casual merchant or military expeditions chronicled in typical records, but deliberate missions conducted under strict secrecy, often under the cover of night or using ships whose provenance was hidden even from local authorities. The order had access to vessels of remarkable design, sturdy, swift, and capable of enduring long voyages into uncharted waters. These ships were equipped not only for transport of goods and personnel but for the careful safeguarding of knowledge, artifacts, and maps that could not risk exposure. The very construction of these ships reflected the Templars' broader philosophy, a blend of practicality, foresight, and esoteric intention. The nature of these voyages remains cloaked in mystery. Some historians suggest that the Templars were exploring trade routes, seeking resources, or establishing covert outposts. Others propose a more tantalizing possibility, that they were following instructions encoded in ancient maps, seeking lands referenced in forgotten texts, or pursuing knowledge that predated their own order. Legends tell of fleets disappearing for months or years, returning with cryptic accounts of distant coastlines, unfamiliar constellations, or relics that could not be explained. While much of this is speculative, it is consistent with the Templars' known capacity for secrecy, meticulous planning, and long-term strategy. They were not impulsive explorers. They were deliberate, patient, and guided by a vision that transcended immediate necessity. The sophistication of their maritime operations was extraordinary for the medieval period. Their ships were equipped for long-distance navigation in ways that modern historians sometimes find hard to reconcile with what is commonly taught about the era. They understood celestial navigation using the stars to determine latitude and, in some cases, approximate longitude. They employed instruments that were rudimentary by modern standards, yet effective, and combined observation with experience to traverse vast distances. Knowledge gathered from the Greeks, Arabs, and earlier civilizations, including understanding of tides, currents, and wind patterns, was preserved and applied with a precision that enabled voyages that would have seemed impossible to ordinary sailors of the time. This was not mere chance or luck. It was the result of deliberate accumulation and transmission of knowledge, a hallmark of the Templar methodology. What sets these voyages apart is the suggestion that some of them extended far beyond the known world, into territories that would not officially be charted for centuries. There are references in certain manuscripts and oral traditions that hint at expeditions to lands of extreme latitude, both north and south. While northern voyages are often associated with mythic Hyperborea or Arctic exploration, southern journeys are more enigmatic, pointing toward distant, uninhabited regions that could correspond with the icy expanses of what we now call Antarctica. To contemplate such journeys is to imagine the Templars braving not only storms and unknown seas but climates, ice, and isolation that would have been inconceivable to most Europeans of their time. These were voyages undertaken with purpose, courage, and extraordinary foresight. The logistics of such undertakings speak to the order's remarkable organizational skills. Ships would need to be provisioned for months, with careful calculations of food, water, and fuel for warmth or cooking. Crews would require training not only in sailing but in survival, observation, and secrecy. Any artifacts or documents carried would need to be protected from damp, rot, or loss. This level of preparation indicates missions of immense importance, undertaken with the understanding that failure could mean death, exposure, or the loss of knowledge critical to the Order's long-term mission. These voyages were not casual exploration. They were deliberate, high-stakes operations designed to safeguard what was considered invaluable. The possibility that some of these expeditions reached Antarctica, or regions equivalent to it during warmer climatic periods, opens a fascinating line of inquiry. Geological evidence shows that the continent was once ice-free, with rivers, forests, and temperate conditions capable of sustaining life. If maps from earlier civilizations, some of which appear in the Templars' archives or in derivative copies, depicted these regions, then it is plausible that the Order could have sought them out, guided by a combination of legend, encoded instructions, and empirical observation. Their ships, trained crews, and knowledge of celestial navigation would have been essential tools in such a journey, allowing them to venture into the unknown with a level of sophistication few contemporaries could match. The human element in these voyages cannot be overstated. The Templars were men bound by vows, yet they were also curious, daring, and driven by a sense of mission that extended beyond earthly reward. To sail into unknown seas in pursuit of hidden knowledge required a blend of faith, courage, and intellect. The isolation, the constant threat of storms, and the psychological strain of navigating uncharted waters would have tested even the most disciplined members of the Order. Yet they persisted, guided by a combination of belief in divine purpose, understanding of natural law, and recognition of the stakes involved. Their endurance under these conditions speaks to a level of commitment and foresight that is remarkable, even by modern standards. The secrecy surrounding these voyages adds another layer of intrigue. Many of the records that might have documented these journeys were destroyed, hidden, or encoded to prevent discovery. Oral traditions, cryptic manuscripts, and symbolic markers within Templar architecture may have preserved hints of their paths. For instance, certain patterns in European commanderies align with celestial markers that correspond to southern latitudes, suggesting an awareness of lands far beyond the usual scope of medieval travel. These alignments could function as a guide, a signal, or even a map for those initiated into the Order's deepest secrets. The combination of physical navigation and symbolic coding reflects a sophisticated system designed to transmit knowledge across time and space without exposure to those unprepared to understand it. There are tantalizing accounts, though often fragmentary and cryptic, suggesting that the Templars may have encountered remnants of earlier civilizations during these voyages. Some legends speak of structures beneath ice, strange artifacts, and inscriptions whose meaning was not immediately apparent. While such stories are difficult to verify, they align with the idea that certain lands, preserved by climate and isolation, could serve as repositories for knowledge from forgotten eras. If the Templars had indeed traveled south with the intention of discovering or safeguarding these remnants, then their actions represent one of the most audacious and visionary undertakings in human history, a journey not for conquest or wealth, but for the preservation of knowledge across millennia. The concept of a southern beacon, a site where knowledge could be deposited, preserved, and perhaps signaled for future discovery, fits within the logic of these voyages. Antarctica, or a region analogous to it during warmer climatic periods, would have been ideal. It is remote, geologically stable, and preserved by natural forces beyond human influence. Any artifacts or inscriptions placed there would endure centuries of isolation, protected by ice and distance. The Templars, with their understanding of celestial alignment, symbolic encoding, and geographic precision, could have created markers, beacons, or repositories designed to last far beyond their own era. In this way, a southern expedition becomes not just plausible, but consistent with their broader methodology of secrecy, preservation, and foresight. The psychological dimension of these voyages is also important. Sailing into the unknown evokes both awe and fear. The open sea, the horizon stretching into infinity, the threat of storms and ice. These elements would have tested every sailor's courage and resolve. For the Templars, however, such challenges were tempered by discipline, faith, and an understanding of the mission's significance. Each voyage was not simply a journey but a meditation on human capability, the endurance of knowledge, and the intersection of the natural and the divine. To undertake such a mission was to embrace uncertainty and to act with the awareness that the outcomes might not be seen within one's own lifetime. The meticulousness of their planning also reflects the broader philosophy of the Order. Every aspect of a southern voyage would have been calculated. Provisioning, timing, celestial observation, navigation, and preservation of knowledge. The Templars understood that the preservation of information was as delicate as the survival of men at sea. To carry maps, relics, or encoded messages across oceans required foresight, ingenuity, and discretion. This level of sophistication reinforces the idea that these voyages were not impulsive or fanciful. They were deliberate acts in a carefully orchestrated strategy to safeguard knowledge that could otherwise vanish into the tides of history. The Templars' secretive voyages, real or legendary, challenge conventional understanding of medieval capability. They suggest a level of technological, navigational, and organizational skill that was extraordinary for the time. More importantly, they reveal a mindset that prioritized preservation of knowledge, long-term vision, and engagement with the unknown. Their ships were vessels not only of men and material but of memory, carrying fragments of lost civilizations, encoded wisdom, and the promise of discovery to lands few dared to imagine. In this context, the southern expeditions become an extension of their philosophical and spiritual mission: to preserve, protect, and transmit knowledge across the most extreme distances and the harshest conditions. Amid the icy expanse of the southernmost continent, shrouded in storms and perpetual isolation, lies the idea of a beacon, a creation so extraordinary that it could endure centuries, perhaps millennia, to communicate across time and space. For the Knights Templar, whose understanding of secrecy, geometry, and celestial alignment was unparalleled, such a beacon was not a mere monument or signal fire. It was a deliberate instrument, a repository of knowledge, and a message intended for a distant future. The concept of the Antarctic Beacon embodies the Templars' deepest priorities: preservation of knowledge, protection from human interference, and the construction of a signal that could survive beyond the reach of kings, inquisitors, and even the slow erosion of memory itself. To imagine such a beacon is to enter the intersection of ambition, intelligence, and mysticism, a place where faith and foresight converge. The first challenge in conceptualizing the beacon is its purpose. Unlike a typical monument, its design must have accounted for extreme isolation, environmental forces, and the limits of human perception. Ice, wind, and snow can destroy most man-made structures. Yet the Templars, if they reached such a destination, would have understood the principles of endurance. They may have relied on rock formations, subterranean chambers, or geological features enhanced by human intervention, integrating natural and artificial structures to withstand the elements. Unlike structures meant to impress contemporary observers, the beacon would have been oriented to the sky, to the stars, and to cycles of the earth. It would have been both visible and invisible, a signal encoded in alignment, proportion, and perhaps even sound or reflection, detectable only to those trained to interpret its design. Central to the beacon's function would have been the Templars' mastery of geometry and celestial observation. Just as their chapels in Europe are oriented toward solstices, equinoxes, and significant stars, the Antarctic beacon would have been positioned to align with celestial markers that endure across centuries. Sunlight reflecting off ice, the position of certain stars, or the shadow cast by a rock formation could serve as indicators, marking time, direction, or location. It is plausible that such alignments could be used to communicate information about the continent itself, about distant lands, or about hidden knowledge stored in the beacon's vicinity. This was not decoration or superstition. It was deliberate, a form of writing in 3 dimensions, spanning space and the cycle of seasons. The materials and construction methods the Templars might have employed speak to their ingenuity. In such a hostile environment, conventional wood or metal would decay or be buried under ice. Stone, carved and placed with precision, offers endurance. Subterranean chambers or partially buried structures could provide shelter from extreme wind, frost, and shifting glaciers. Even ice itself could be incorporated into the design, using natural formations as protective walls or reflective surfaces. The Templars were adept at using their environment to advantage, shaping landscapes, modifying water flow, and designing buildings that harmonized with natural features. If they applied these techniques to Antarctica, the beacon could have become a hybrid of nature and human intention, a signal intended to endure as the land itself shifted and aged. Inside or near the beacon, there may have been repositories for manuscripts, maps, or relics, stored in ways that preserved them from decay. The Templars were meticulous recorders, understanding that the survival of knowledge depends not only on secrecy, but on practical protection. Sealed chambers, containers resistant to moisture, and encoded instructions could ensure that objects survived long enough to be discovered by future generations. These repositories could include copies of maps depicting lands now lost under ice, records of celestial observation, or relics meant to convey spiritual or philosophical insight. The beacon, then, was not only a structure. It was a time capsule, a signal to the future, a bridge across centuries that would allow knowledge to re-emerge when conditions permitted. Equally significant is the psychological and symbolic aspect of the beacon. In a land as isolated and extreme as Antarctica, building a structure is an act of audacity, a declaration of intent, and a statement of endurance. For the Templars, every stone, every alignment, and every hidden compartment would have carried meaning. Constructing such a beacon would have been a meditation on human perseverance, a tangible expression of faith, foresight, and understanding of cosmic and earthly laws. The act itself, undertaken in such a place, demonstrates a consciousness of time and scale that is almost incomprehensible. A project designed not for one lifetime or generation, but for a distant future, for eyes that might only see it centuries later. The location of the beacon would have been critical. Templars were meticulous in selecting sites that offered strategic advantage, symbolic significance, and environmental protection. In Antarctica, this might involve elevated terrain, proximity to glacial formations that would protect against wind and snow, or natural landmarks that could serve as guides. The placement would have also required understanding of visibility, both how the beacon could be observed from certain angles and how its signals could interact with natural light, ice reflections, or astronomical markers. Every decision would have been calculated, not haphazard, reflecting an understanding of the environment as an ally rather than a threat. If the beacon functioned as a guide or signal, it could also have incorporated elements intended to communicate information to distant observers or travelers. This might include reflective surfaces that catch the sun at particular angles, stone arrangements that cast shadows indicating orientation, or patterns that encode instructions, distances, or warnings. It may even have employed sound or vibration, subtle ways to signal presence or proximity. The key principle is that the Templars, trained in secrecy and precision, would have designed the beacon to communicate over time, in ways that could only be interpreted by those who understood the underlying language of geometry, astronomy, and symbolism. The Antarctic Beacon also represents a profound act of preservation. In choosing such an extreme environment, the Templars were acknowledging the vulnerability of knowledge to human conflict, neglect, and decay. Europe, the Holy Land, and even Mediterranean trade routes were unstable, prone to war, conquest, and upheaval. By moving certain knowledge to the farthest reaches of the world, the Templars were creating a safeguard beyond human reach. It is a concept both radical and logical. If knowledge is too precious to be lost, protect it where only extraordinary conditions can preserve it. Ice becomes a vault, isolation a shield, and the harshness of the environment a guarantor of secrecy and endurance. The construction of such a beacon would also have involved a ritual or ceremonial aspect, consistent with Templar practice. Their work often blended physical labor with spiritual observance, encoding intention and purpose in every act. Building a beacon in the southern wilderness may have been a form of devotion, a way to consecrate knowledge as sacred, ensuring that it would endure not merely as information, but as a living testament to human ingenuity, courage, and foresight. The placement of symbols, the orientation of stones, and the design of hidden chambers could all serve dual purposes: practical preservation and spiritual encoding. In this way, the beacon becomes both a physical structure and a philosophical statement. It is also conceivable that the beacon functioned as a point of reference for later expeditions or for those in Europe who knew its existence. Alignments with the stars, inscriptions, and encoded maps could provide guidance to those trained to interpret the signs. The Templars were masters of this approach, using architecture, manuscripts, and symbolic markers to transmit knowledge across vast distances and generations. The beacon, then, is not merely isolated. It is part of a network, an intersection of spatial, temporal, and symbolic communication. It represents the Templars' understanding that knowledge must be active, navigable, and interpretable, not simply stored. The Antarctic Beacon also engages with human imagination and the limits of belief. To conceive of such a project requires extraordinary vision, an understanding of geography, astronomy, and engineering far beyond what is expected in the medieval period. It demands courage to act in the face of isolation and uncertainty. It requires patience to create something whose purpose might only be revealed centuries later. In this sense, the beacon is as much a psychological monument as a physical one, reflecting the Templars' capacity for long-term thinking, discipline, and engagement with the mysteries of the world. Beyond preservation, the beacon may have had symbolic resonance linked to Hyperborea and other mythical homelands. In Templar understanding, the southern lands could represent not just a refuge, but a locus of continuity, a place where human knowledge, sacred wisdom, and cosmic order converge. The beacon would function as a marker of this convergence, signaling to the future that certain knowledge had been safeguarded, that civilizations had anticipated the impermanence of political power and the fragility of memory. It embodies the belief that human insight, when properly protected, can transcend time, survive harsh environments, and re-emerge when the world is ready to receive it. In contemplating the Antarctic Beacon, one begins to see the Templars not merely as an order of knights, but as architects of endurance, guardians of memory, and masters of foresight. Every element, from location to construction, from alignment to hidden repository, reflects a sophisticated strategy that combines practicality, spirituality, and symbolism. The beacon is a statement that knowledge, if treated with care and vision, can survive centuries, waiting for the moment when it is rediscovered, interpreted, and applied. It stands as a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and the desire to communicate across the span of time and space. Long after the Templars vanished from the public stage, whispers persisted of their secrets surviving in the most unexpected places. Among the most compelling of these whispers is the idea that the Antarctic Beacon, or something akin to it, left traces, clues encoded in maps, legends, and anomalies that challenge conventional history. The concept of anomalies is central to understanding the beacon, because the Templars' work was not meant to be obvious. They understood that true preservation requires subtlety, and that the passage of time often erases obvious signs while preserving the carefully hidden. Mountains, ice formations, and natural markers could serve as accidental guides or as deliberate placements, forming alignments that become apparent only when studied with intention and knowledge. These anomalies, scattered across explorers' reports, maps, and oral histories, form the skeletal outline of a story that is at once elusive and extraordinary. Maps from the late medieval period often contain puzzling details that seem out of place. Coastlines that would not be officially charted for centuries, features resembling mountain ranges or rivers in regions presumed unexplored, and strange notations hinting at far southern lands appear in manuscripts that were circulated in Europe. Some scholars have dismissed these as errors, imagination, or miscopying of earlier documents. Others have noted a pattern. These anomalies are consistent with knowledge that could have been transmitted by the Templars, preserved in cryptic form to survive the collapse of the order and centuries of political upheaval. Certain maps even suggest the presence of safe harbors, elevated land, or markers that could serve as beacons, features that align with the logic of the Antarctic structure hypothesized to have been built by the order. Explorers' journals from later centuries add another layer of mystery. Early seafarers navigating the southern oceans reported encountering strange formations, unusual light phenomena, and evidence of human activity in areas that were supposedly uninhabited. Icebergs arranged in patterns, stone structures partially buried beneath ice, or unusual reflections on the horizon sometimes appear in records that have been largely forgotten. While these reports were often dismissed at the time, a pattern emerges when viewed collectively. The anomalies suggest an awareness of features that could correspond with deliberate markers or installations. The possibility that the Templars' beacon, or something like it, left a physical imprint on the landscape is a tantalizing explanation for these otherwise inexplicable observations. Some anomalies are not physical but linguistic or symbolic. Place names, both ancient and later, sometimes encode meanings that suggest hidden knowledge. Explorers and cartographers have noted names in southern regions that bear resemblance to European terms, Templar references, or symbolic language that appears in Templar manuscripts. Whether these names were bestowed deliberately by the Templars, copied from lost documents, or introduced later by followers seeking to encode knowledge, the patterns are striking. They suggest a network of communication that transcended centuries, a system of signals meant to guide those who could interpret them. Language becomes a marker as tangible as stone or ice, linking the past to the present in subtle ways. Geological anomalies add another dimension. Certain formations in the Antarctic, rocks that appear sculpted, unusual elevations, or patterns in glacial ice, have been suggested by some researchers to be more than natural coincidence. While the extreme conditions of the continent can create fascinating and sometimes deceptive features, the possibility that some structures were modified or enhanced by human activity cannot be entirely dismissed. The Templars were known for their skill in architecture and engineering, and if they traveled to remote lands, it stands to reason they could have incorporated natural features into their designs. The human eye is quick to overlook subtle modifications in vast landscapes, yet when anomalies are studied collectively, a pattern emerges that hints at deliberate intention. Oral histories, though often dismissed as legend, provide another layer of evidence. Indigenous peoples, early explorers, and even peripheral European observers occasionally recount stories of structures, lights, or phenomena in the southernmost regions that do not correspond with known settlements or natural events. While these accounts are fragmentary and filtered through cultural interpretation, the persistence of certain motifs, beacons, signals, hidden treasures, suggests a memory of human activity beyond conventional records. When combined with maps, geological observations, and navigational anomalies, these stories hint at the possibility that the beacon was more than theoretical. It may have been a tangible reality, interacting with the landscape, the ice, and the sky. Astronomical anomalies also factor into the evidence. Certain alignments of ice formations, mountain peaks, or other natural markers correspond with star positions, solstices, or celestial events in ways that are difficult to attribute to coincidence. The Templars' mastery of celestial navigation, sacred geometry, and symbolic encoding provides a framework for understanding these alignments. If they intended the beacon to be readable from both Earth and sky, then the placement of markers, reflective surfaces, or carved stones could encode information about latitude, direction, or timing. These signals, subtle and often obscured by environmental change, could persist through centuries, detectable only to those who approach with the requisite knowledge, patience, and curiosity. The combination of anomalies across disciplines, cartography, geology, astronomy, and oral tradition, creates a compelling argument for the existence of the beacon or its traces. Each anomaly on its own might be dismissed as coincidence, error, or exaggeration. But collectively, they form a mosaic of evidence that is difficult to ignore. The Templars were meticulous planners, adept at encoding knowledge across mediums, and aware that their work could be lost, misunderstood, or corrupted over time. By embedding information in multiple layers, physical, symbolic, linguistic, they created redundancy that increases the likelihood of survival, even in the harshest conditions. The anomalies we observe today may be echoes of that deliberate design, fragments of a signal intended to endure across the centuries. Even more compelling is the possibility that the beacon's influence extended beyond Antarctica. Certain Templar commanderies, especially those in France, Iberia, and the Mediterranean, show architectural features, alignments, and symbolic motifs that could be read as instructions or guides for distant locations. These features often incorporate geometry that corresponds with specific latitudes or celestial markers, suggesting that the order may have encoded knowledge of the beacon into buildings closer to home. In this way, the beacon was not isolated. It was part of a broader network of communication, connecting remote landscapes, secret knowledge, and generations of initiates. The anomalies observed in maps, structures, and oral histories are thus part of an integrated system, a multi-layered signal stretching across space and time. Human perception plays a role in identifying anomalies as well. The icy southern continent is deceptive. Shifting glaciers, sudden storms, and extreme light conditions can distort vision and memory. Early explorers may have encountered the beacon without understanding it, recording unusual patterns or signals in ways that later generations could reinterpret. The Templars, anticipating centuries of environmental change and human error, likely designed the beacon with this in mind. Alignments would have been precise yet subtle, markers visible only under specific conditions, and signals encoded to survive misinterpretation. The interplay between human perception, environmental forces, and intentional design adds layers of intrigue to the puzzle, ensuring that only those approaching with care, patience, and knowledge could discern the intended message. The anomalies also suggest a deliberate attempt to challenge assumptions about history and geography. The southern continent, long thought to be barren, unexplored, and insignificant in the medieval worldview, may have held purpose in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. By leaving traces, physical, symbolic, or linguistic, the Templars could extend influence beyond Europe, connecting their knowledge to distant lands and future generations. The beacon, as a concept and as a physical entity, represents this audacious extension of power, foresight, and intellectual ambition. It challenges conventional narratives and encourages reconsideration of what humans were capable of understanding, preserving, and transmitting during the medieval period. Finally, the anomalies themselves serve as invitations. They are markers for those willing to look beyond the surface, to question the assumptions of history, and to consider the Templars' capacity for extraordinary vision. Maps, inscriptions, geological formations, and oral histories form a web that beckons researchers, explorers, and dreamers alike to piece together a puzzle that spans continents and centuries. The anomalies are both evidence and narrative, a guide that connects the meticulous work of the Templars with the possibility of discovery, suggesting that knowledge, if encoded with care and insight, can survive beyond the limitations of human perception and endure in the most hostile environments. In essence, the anomalies are the echoes of the beacon itself. They hint at what may have been, preserved in fragments, patterns, and signals, challenging us to reconsider what is possible. Each irregular coastline, unusual light phenomenon, or symbolic reference in a distant commandery is a piece of a larger story, one that speaks to the audacity, ingenuity, and foresight of the Knights Templar. The Antarctic Beacon, whether fully intact, partially hidden, or surviving only in traces, is a testament to the enduring power of knowledge, encoded and protected across the centuries, waiting for those bold enough to follow its subtle signs and uncover the truths that have been carefully hidden from the casual observer. Across centuries, scholars, mystics, and enthusiasts have debated the meaning behind the Templars' most secretive pursuits, and among the most tantalizing theories is the connection between their Antarctic beacon and the legendary land of Hyperborea. Hyperborea, described in fragmentary Greek accounts as a place beyond the north wind, has long captured the imagination as a utopian realm, a homeland of wisdom and abundance, a region untouched by ordinary human strife. For the Templars, who were not content merely to guard holy relics or engage in martial campaigns, such myths were not fanciful stories, but potentially encoded memories of ancient knowledge. They may have believed Hyperborea was a tangible place, a lost civilization or sanctuary whose wisdom had survived in secret and could guide the future of humanity if properly preserved. The beacon, in this light, becomes more than a signal. It is a bridge to a mythic geography, a waypoint between human history and forgotten cosmic truths. Modern theories suggest that Hyperborea was more than myth, pointing to the possibility of lands that existed in the distant past, now obscured by shifting ice, rising seas, or cataclysmic events. Certain geological studies indicate that areas of the polar regions were once temperate, featuring rivers, forests, and conditions suitable for human habitation. If the Templars had access to ancient maps, oral traditions, or fragments of knowledge preserved in manuscripts from Byzantium, the Arab world, or earlier civilizations, they might have interpreted these indications as evidence of Hyperborea's existence. The Antarctic Beacon could then be understood not as a purely symbolic act but as a practical measure, a marker to preserve memory, knowledge, and perhaps even access points to a hidden homeland, frozen and remote, awaiting rediscovery. In this sense, the beacon becomes a manifestation of the Templars' long-term vision, uniting myth, geography, and strategic foresight. The symbolic resonance of Hyperborea for the Templars extends beyond geography. Legends describe Hyperborea as a land where human potential was cultivated to its fullest, where harmony with natural law and cosmic order was maintained, and where advanced knowledge, perhaps technological or spiritual, survived untouched by human folly. The Templars, who were themselves guardians of knowledge and interpreters of cosmic patterns, may have viewed the beacon as a means of maintaining continuity with this lost wisdom. By establishing a physical marker in an extreme and remote location, they could ensure that knowledge, once uncovered, could be studied, interpreted, and preserved, linking European understanding with insights that had endured for centuries. Hyperborea thus serves both as destination and metaphor, representing the convergence of the mystical, the intellectual, and the practical in the Templars' worldview. Theories also explore the relationship between the beacon and the stars. Hyperborean myths often emphasize celestial connections, describing cycles of light, polar phenomena, and patterns in the heavens that guide human activity. The Templars' knowledge of sacred geometry, celestial alignment, and symbolic encoding suggests that they might have intended the beacon to function as a cosmological marker. Its orientation could preserve information about star positions, solstices, or even long-term astronomical cycles, effectively turning the Antarctic landscape into a record of cosmic patterns. In this sense, the beacon becomes a multidimensional tool, part map, part signal, part repository of encoded understanding. Hyperborea, then, is both destination and lens, a mythic framework through which the Templars interpreted and transmitted knowledge. The connection to Hyperborea also informs the Templars' choice of location. Remote, extreme, and enduring, Antarctica fits many of the mythic qualities attributed to Hyperborea: isolation, preservation, and access to cosmic observation. The harsh environment, rather than being a deterrent, may have been seen as an advantage, ensuring that the knowledge stored at the beacon remains secure from human interference. The extreme latitude would provide unique astronomical observations, long periods of light and darkness, and natural features that could be incorporated into the beacon's design. Every alignment, every placement of stone or marker, could encode multiple layers of information, both practical and symbolic, linking terrestrial reality with the mythic geography of Hyperborea and the timeless wisdom it represented. Speculative historians have proposed that the beacon may have functioned as part of a navigational or signaling system. Hyperborea, as a lost or hidden homeland, would have required markers to guide future seekers. The Templars' use of celestial alignment, reflective surfaces, and geometric encoding could serve as instructions for locating Hyperborea or understanding its position in relation to the wider world. This would require extraordinary foresight, knowledge of navigation, astronomical cycles, and landscape interpretation, combined with the ability to encode information in a way that survives centuries. Such a system demonstrates the Templars' capacity for long-term thinking, patience, and strategic communication, blending the practical with the mystical in ways that continue to fascinate scholars and enthusiasts alike. In addition to navigation, the beacon may have been a symbolic representation of the Templars' philosophical and spiritual mission. Hyperborea, as a metaphorical space, embodies human potential, cosmic order, and the continuity of wisdom. By constructing a beacon aligned with celestial and terrestrial markers, the Templars could create a tangible expression of these principles, embedding their understanding of order, geometry, and the sacred in a remote landscape. The beacon thus functions on multiple levels, as a physical marker, a repository of knowledge, and a spiritual symbol, reminding future generations of the intersection between human ambition and divine or cosmic order. It embodies the Templars' belief that knowledge and insight must be preserved, guided, and transmitted through both practical and symbolic means. The connection between the Antarctic Beacon and Hyperborea also resonates with modern interpretations of lost civilizations and esoteric knowledge. The idea that human history contains hidden layers, that knowledge has survived in secret, and that certain locations hold keys to understanding the past is central to much speculative scholarship. Hyperborea serves as a conceptual anchor for these ideas, providing a narrative framework that explains the Templars' extraordinary efforts to encode, preserve, and transmit information. The beacon, in turn, becomes a tangible manifestation of this philosophy, a structure that bridges myth, history, and geography, embodying the Templars' commitment to safeguarding knowledge against the erosion of time and human neglect. Some theories extend this connection even further, suggesting that the Templars may have left additional markers, inscriptions, or signals intended to be read in combination with the beacon. European commanderies, maps, and architectural alignments could serve as complementary nodes in a network, linking the distant Antarctic location with familiar European landscapes. These connections would require a deep understanding of geometry, astronomy, and encoded language, reflecting the Templars' mastery of multiple disciplines. By integrating these markers, the beacon could act not only as a repository or signal but as a reference point within a global system of knowledge, connecting Hyperborea, Europe, and the farthest reaches of the known and unknown world. The enduring fascination with Hyperborea and the Antarctic Beacon is fueled by the interplay of fact, legend, and interpretation. While concrete evidence of the Templars' southern expeditions remains elusive, the alignment of mythic narratives, symbolic practices, and historical anomalies suggests that the pursuit was not purely imaginary. The Templars' documented interest in celestial patterns, secretive architecture, and preservation of knowledge across generations aligns with the requirements of constructing a beacon intended to survive in extreme environments. Hyperborea, whether real, symbolic, or both, provides a framework through which these activities can be understood, offering insight into the Templars' vision and methodology. Moreover, the philosophical implications of the Hyperborea connection are profound. By linking the beacon to a lost or hidden homeland, the Templars were expressing a vision of continuity, endurance, and human responsibility. Knowledge, once discovered or preserved, is not meant for immediate consumption but for the careful stewardship of future generations. The beacon becomes a meditation on the impermanence of empires, the fragility of memory, and the enduring value of insight. Hyperborea, in this context, is less a specific place than a conceptual horizon, representing the possibility of understanding, preservation, and connection across time and space. The disappearance of Templar knowledge and artifacts has long fueled speculation, conspiracy, and intrigue, forming one of the enduring mysteries of history. When the order was suppressed in the early 14th century, their libraries, archives, and treasuries were systematically seized, destroyed, or hidden by authorities eager to erase their influence. Yet fragments of knowledge persisted, often in cryptic forms, suggesting that the Templars had anticipated such persecution and devised methods to preserve what was most precious. These artifacts and manuscripts, some of which hint at connections to distant lands and advanced understanding of geometry, astronomy, and navigation, became part of a hidden legacy that continues to intrigue historians, explorers, and enthusiasts centuries later. The very fact that so much knowledge vanished simultaneously across multiple regions suggests planning and foresight rather than mere chance, hinting at the existence of safe repositories and secret networks that extended far beyond Europe. The mechanisms by which Templar knowledge disappeared were as deliberate as they were dramatic. When King Philip IV of France moved against the order, the arrests, trials, and executions were swift, violent, and designed to dismantle both the organization and its memory. Yet the Templars' secrecy, encoded in architecture, symbols, and manuscript annotations, meant that critical knowledge could be hidden from inquisitors. Books were burned, but encoded maps and symbolic markers survived in ways designed to evade destruction. The disappearance was not merely physical but also intellectual. Manuscripts were sometimes split, parts hidden in monasteries, private collections, or remote locations. Instructions were encoded geometrically, astronomically, or linguistically, and artifacts were sometimes buried, concealed, or transported to distant lands. This layered approach to preservation ensured that even as the order was publicly eradicated, its intellectual and spiritual legacy could survive, accessible only to those capable of decoding it. Some of the most tantalizing hints come from the fate of Templar maps and charts. Certain medieval maps depict coastlines, rivers, and geographic features that were not officially known at the time. Scholars have speculated that these maps may have included instructions for southern voyages or locations of hidden beacons, including sites in Antarctica. When the Templars were suppressed, these maps often disappeared from records, resurfacing centuries later in libraries or private collections under mysterious circumstances. The disappearance of these documents suggests deliberate concealment, either by members of the order themselves or by allies who understood the importance of preserving knowledge for a distant future. The very survival of fragmentary maps amid systemic destruction speaks to the precision, foresight, and careful planning that characterize the Templars' approach to safeguarding information. Artifacts associated with the Templars also seem to vanish in a systematic way. Relics, ceremonial objects, and technological tools are mentioned in contemporary records, yet their later whereabouts are often unknown. Some artifacts may have been transported far from Europe, placed in hidden locations where they could survive natural and human threats. Others may have been intentionally destroyed to prevent misuse, leaving only symbolic markers or encoded instructions for future discovery. The disappearance of these artifacts is not random. It follows a pattern consistent with the Templars' strategic and philosophical understanding of impermanence. By removing or hiding physical objects, they were creating a selective archive, ensuring that only those capable of interpretation, persistence, and understanding could access the knowledge when the time was right. The Antarctic Beacon itself becomes central to understanding this disappearance. If the Templars intended to preserve knowledge in a location beyond human reach, then the disappearance of associated maps, instruments, or notes makes practical sense. The beacon could serve as a repository, a signal, and a safeguard all at once. By moving critical knowledge to a remote and extreme environment, the Templars reduced the risk of it falling into the hands of inquisitors, rival powers, or opportunistic treasure seekers. The extreme latitude, ice coverage, and isolation would have functioned as natural protection, while the encoded alignments and symbols ensured that only those with the requisite knowledge could interpret or access the information. In this way, the disappearance of artifacts from Europe complements the preservation of knowledge in distant, concealed locations, forming a dual system of concealment and endurance. The process of disappearance also extended to human memory and oral transmission. Templars who carried knowledge orally or through initiation rites were dispersed, executed, or forced into secrecy. Communities, allies, and sympathetic institutions may have continued to preserve fragments of instruction or lore, often encoded as allegory, ritual, or symbolic art. Oral traditions, whether passed in monastic circles or in peripheral societies, ensured that knowledge could survive even when physical evidence was destroyed. These fragmented transmissions could later guide explorers, researchers, or initiates to hidden repositories, functioning as a subtle network of signals and markers connecting past, present, and future. The disappearance of explicit records thus became a mechanism for testing diligence, insight, and comprehension, preserving knowledge only for those capable of decoding it. Political factors played a significant role in the vanishing of Templar artifacts. The Order's immense wealth, landholdings, and influence had made it a target for secular and ecclesiastical authorities. By controlling the disappearance of physical evidence, the Templars were indirectly resisting the appropriation of their intellectual and spiritual capital. Every lost manuscript, hidden relic, or vanished map represents a calculated decision to protect knowledge from misuse while ensuring its survival. In this light, disappearance is not destruction. It is preservation through obfuscation. The Templars understood that power, greed, and political ambition could destroy physical objects or misinterpret their meaning. By disappearing, the artifacts became insulated from corruption, waiting for a future capable of understanding and interpreting their purpose. Modern investigations into Templar disappearance reveal patterns that continue to puzzle historians. Libraries, private collections, and scattered archives contain manuscripts and charts whose origins or connections to the Order remain uncertain. In some cases, the documents include references to hidden repositories, extreme latitudes, or celestial alignments, suggesting awareness of locations like the Antarctic Beacon. Yet attempts to trace these connections are hampered by gaps in records, deliberate misdirection, or the encoded nature of the content. The disappearance of artifacts and knowledge thus continues to shape modern scholarship, forming the basis for speculation about the extent of Templar exploration, their understanding of distant lands, and the sophistication of their long-term planning. The psychological dimension of disappearance is equally compelling. By removing knowledge and artifacts from plain sight, the Templars created an aura of mystery, challenging future generations to search, question, and discover. Disappearance itself becomes a teaching tool, emphasizing patience, observation, and insight. Those who encounter traces of lost maps, relics, or symbols are forced to engage actively with the past, piecing together meaning from fragmentary evidence. In this way, disappearance is a method of initiation. Only those willing to study, explore, and reason can reconstruct the knowledge, mirroring the disciplined approach of the Order itself. The loss of physical artifacts, then, is not merely a historical fact but part of a deliberate pedagogy embedded in Templar practice. The disappearance also intersects with natural processes, particularly in extreme environments. Ice, glaciers, shifting soil, and weather can bury, obscure, or preserve artifacts in ways that delay discovery for centuries. The Templars, aware of such conditions, could have exploited them intentionally, using natural forces as part of their preservation strategy. The Antarctic Beacon, positioned in an environment of near-permanent ice, may have been deliberately constructed with this understanding in mind. Disappearance becomes both a protective mechanism and a temporal filter, ensuring that knowledge emerges only under specific conditions and to those capable of interpreting it. The interplay of human foresight and environmental preservation exemplifies the sophistication of Templar planning, blurring the line between disappearance and endurance. Speculative theories even suggest that some Templar artifacts were relocated across continents, creating hidden networks linking Europe with distant lands. Maritime skill, encoded instructions, and trusted agents could facilitate the movement of critical objects, maps, and manuscripts. Such networks might have connected commanderies, monasteries, and private estates, ensuring the survival of knowledge even as public access was eliminated. The disappearance of artifacts is thus not chaotic but strategic, reflecting a vision that spans geography, generations, and disciplines. Each lost object, each vanished manuscript, becomes part of a broader system of concealment and preservation, aligned with the Templars' overarching mission to protect wisdom across time. Long after the dissolution of the Knights Templar, stories began to circulate of secret societies and clandestine groups claiming inheritance of the Order's deepest secrets. While many of these accounts have been dismissed as legend or conspiracy, a careful reading of historical, archival, and anecdotal evidence suggests that some form of continuity may have persisted. Surviving members of the Order, having witnessed the violent suppression, may have gone underground, taking with them fragments of knowledge too dangerous or precious to reveal. These individuals, bound by vows and trained in secrecy, could have maintained small networks of trust, preserving manuscripts, artifacts, and oral teachings far from the eyes of monarchs, inquisitors, and opportunistic treasure hunters. In such networks, the Antarctic Beacon may have remained a central point of interest, a distant objective, a repository of hidden knowledge, and a guiding principle for future generations of initiates. The concept of these secret societies is not merely fanciful. Europe, in the centuries following the Templar suppression, witnessed the emergence of organizations claiming connection to or inspiration from the Order. Some were philosophical, some mystical, and others military in nature. While the veracity of each claim varies, the pattern suggests an enduring fascination with Templar knowledge and an organized attempt to preserve its legacy. Letters, diaries, and private correspondence occasionally hint at coded references to hidden treasures, remote locations, or repositories of wisdom. The Antarctic Beacon, if it existed or was planned, would fit seamlessly into this framework as a focal point for these secretive efforts. It would represent the apex of knowledge preservation, the ultimate destination or symbolic center around which the Order's remaining members could orient their clandestine activities. These surviving networks would have relied heavily on encoded communication. The Templars were masters of secrecy, adept at transmitting information without revealing its full significance to outsiders. Manuscripts were often deliberately obscured, diagrams layered with symbolic meaning, and instructions divided into segments carried by different individuals. Oral transmission played a key role, with initiates memorizing sequences, chants, or allegorical narratives that served as mnemonic devices. The Antarctic Beacon, as an ultimate repository, would have been referenced in such teachings, ensuring that its location, purpose, and function were preserved in a form accessible only to the disciplined and initiated. This method of layered encoding made discovery by the uninitiated nearly impossible, preserving knowledge through discipline, patience, and trust rather than brute force. One challenge for these networks would have been maintaining coherence over time. As generations passed, members of these clandestine groups would need to pass on knowledge without revealing too much, balancing the risk of exposure against the need for continuity. Certain practices, rituals, and coded symbols may have functioned as continuity markers, guiding successive generations toward key repositories like the Antarctic Beacon. These systems of transmission likely involved careful geographic, symbolic, and celestial knowledge, with members trained to interpret signs embedded in architecture, natural landmarks, and manuscripts. In this way, the beacon remained not just a physical objective, but a conceptual anchor for an enduring secret tradition, linking generations of Templars and their heirs across centuries and continents. The persistence of such societies is suggested by the historical record, where references to hidden knowledge, secret lodges, and keepers of the Order appear intermittently. These references are often oblique, embedded in personal letters, ecclesiastical reports, or marginal notes in manuscripts. In some cases, curious anomalies in architecture, geometric patterns, symbolic carvings, or alignments with celestial markers may encode directions, allegorical meaning, or reminders of distant repositories. The Antarctic Beacon, as a remote and extreme location, would naturally be the subject of coded attention, its significance preserved through symbol, ritual, and memory. The connection between these societies and the beacon emphasizes a principle central to the Templars. Knowledge worth preserving must be protected from casual access, requiring study, insight, and dedication to uncover. There is also evidence that the surviving Templars or their heirs maintained a network of observation and exploration. Even if they could not reach the southern beacon directly, they may have coordinated reconnaissance, sending ships or trusted agents to monitor changes in remote locations. Reports of strange formations, unusual reflections, or geographic anomalies in polar regions might originate from these activities, suggesting ongoing interest and indirect engagement with the beacon. Such operations would have required a combination of careful observation, coded reporting, and interpretation by experts within the network. The beacon, therefore, is not simply a static repository but part of a dynamic system in which knowledge, observation, and exploration are continuously linked across generations. The spiritual dimension of these societies cannot be overlooked. The Templars were as much a spiritual order as a martial one, with rituals, meditation, and esoteric understanding forming the core of their identity. For those continuing the order's work clandestinely, preserving knowledge of the beacon would have been both practical and sacred. The Antarctic site could be conceptualized as a place of enlightenment, a locus where spiritual and intellectual traditions converge, and a focal point for meditation on cosmic order. Rituals and allegorical teachings surrounding the beacon would reinforce its significance, ensuring that initiates understood its role not merely as a repository of information, but as a symbol of enduring wisdom, foresight, and alignment with both human and cosmic principles. These societies may also have employed an elaborate system of mentorship. Senior members, custodians of knowledge, would instruct younger initiates not merely in historical facts or physical skills, but in the philosophy, geometry, and navigation necessary to understand and locate distant repositories. The Antarctic Beacon, with its celestial alignments and symbolic design, would require instruction across multiple disciplines. Initiates would learn to interpret maps, understand environmental patterns, and decode symbols, combining empirical observation with esoteric understanding. This approach ensured that the knowledge was preserved in context, capable of guiding action, insight, and discovery, rather than remaining inert or misinterpreted. Some historians speculate that these surviving networks extended into other institutions, such as universities, monastic libraries, and private collections, using legitimate social structures as protective covers. Manuscripts or artifacts could be hidden under the guise of scholarship, theology, or science, effectively embedding the Templars' knowledge into mainstream cultural institutions without exposing the order itself. The Antarctic Beacon, as a far-removed and secure site, functioned as the ultimate repository for items that could not safely remain in European or urban environments. This approach combines prudence with ambition, ensuring the survival of knowledge while avoiding the perils of political interference, war, or inquisitorial scrutiny. Legends persist of coded instructions being discovered centuries later, leading explorers, scholars, or enthusiasts to search for the beacon or related repositories. While the veracity of such claims is difficult to verify, the consistency of themes, remote locations, hidden knowledge, celestial markers, suggests a pattern aligned with Templar methodology. The survival of encoded instructions, partial maps, and symbolic markers lends plausibility to the idea that secret societies continued the order's work, guiding those capable of understanding toward distant repositories. The Antarctic Beacon, as the pinnacle of such efforts, symbolizes the culmination of centuries of foresight, discipline, and strategic preservation. The social and psychological dynamics of these societies also played a critical role. Secrecy demanded trust, loyalty, and ethical discipline. Initiates had to understand the stakes. Failure, betrayal, or exposure could result in the loss of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Maintaining cohesion required shared purpose and reinforced values, creating a community that could operate quietly and effectively despite external pressures. The Antarctic Beacon, as a symbol and objective, provided focus, giving members a tangible representation of their mission and the legacy they were preserving. It functioned as both motivator and touchstone, uniting disparate groups and individuals around a common goal that transcended immediate survival or material gain. Moreover, the surviving Templars likely adapted over time, refining techniques for preservation, encoding, and transmission of knowledge. They could integrate contemporary discoveries, adopt new technologies, and adjust to shifting political landscapes, all while maintaining the core objectives of secrecy and endurance. The Antarctic Beacon represents the intersection of these adaptations, a site where ancient wisdom, practical engineering, and strategic foresight converge. Its location, design, and function reflect centuries of accumulated knowledge, preserved and transmitted by individuals and networks committed to continuity across generations. In the centuries following the dissolution of the Knights Templar, a series of early modern explorations ventured into southern latitudes, often driven by the pursuit of trade, conquest, or scientific curiosity. Yet some of these voyages reveal accounts that hint at encounters with features or phenomena difficult to reconcile with conventional knowledge of the time. Sailors recorded unusual formations of ice and stone, inexplicable reflections of light on the horizon, and strange patterns in the southern oceans that seemed almost intentional. While most of these accounts were dismissed as exaggeration, mirage, or navigational error, the recurrence of similar reports across multiple expeditions raises questions. Could some of these anomalies be the distant traces of the Templar Antarctic Beacon, a structure hidden by ice, designed to endure centuries, and subtly influencing perception from afar? If so, these early explorers may have stumbled unknowingly across a legacy left in anticipation of their arrival centuries later. The motivations of early explorers often combined practical necessity with curiosity, but their journals reveal more than just geographical observations. Some describe patterns in the landscape that defy natural explanation: rock formations aligned in geometric shapes, glacial ridges forming lines that suggest deliberate placement, and elevated ice mounds that cast shadows at specific times of day. While these features may seem inconsequential to a casual observer, they fit the profile of what might remain if a Templar beacon existed: enduring structures designed to be interpreted under specific conditions, readable only to those with knowledge of celestial alignment, geometry, or encoded symbolism. The explorer's inability to fully comprehend these phenomena does not diminish their significance. It may indicate the careful subtlety with which the beacon was designed, ensuring survival without inviting immediate discovery. Some accounts describe lights in the polar night that do not correspond to natural aurora patterns. These lights are often subtle, flickering, or reflecting off ice in ways that suggest intentional placement of reflective surfaces. Sailors, unfamiliar with local conditions and lacking instruments to measure or interpret them, recorded these phenomena with awe and confusion. Later analysis might interpret these lights as markers, signals, or messages encoded in reflection, the kind of subtle communication the Templars were known to employ. In extreme latitudes, where daylight and darkness follow long cycles, such reflective signals could serve as temporal markers, aligning with celestial cycles or providing orientation for those trained to decode them. The presence of these lights adds a layer of intrigue, suggesting that even centuries later, the beacon could still exert influence on the environment and the perception of those who ventured near. Beyond physical anomalies, explorers' journals often include ambiguous references to structures or human artifacts hidden beneath ice or partially buried in snow. Some describe patterns of stones, shapes resembling walls or steps, and depressions that suggest subterranean chambers. While these accounts are fragmentary, when analyzed collectively they form a consistent pattern that hints at deliberate human modification of the landscape. If the Templars built a beacon in Antarctica, these subtle traces would be precisely what we would expect: durable structures partially concealed by natural processes, designed to communicate indirectly across time and space. The explorers' reports, though incomplete, may represent the first glimpses of these hidden installations, recorded centuries after they were constructed, their meaning obscured by environment and history. Navigation itself may have inadvertently brought explorers close to potential Templar sites. Early modern sailors relied on celestial observations, rudimentary maps, and dead reckoning to traverse the southern oceans. Some journals note surprising alignments between natural features and celestial markers, suggesting that the explorers were encountering landscapes that corresponded with preserved knowledge. The Templars' use of star positions, solstice shadows, and geometrical alignments could explain these coincidences. If the Antarctic Beacon was designed with such precision, even casual observers might detect traces of its planning, though they could not interpret them fully. This reinforces the notion that the beacon was constructed not for immediate recognition, but for endurance and eventual decoding by those equipped with sufficient understanding. In addition, reports of unusual weather patterns, ice formations, and tidal anomalies occasionally appear in explorers' accounts. While many of these can be explained by natural phenomena, certain reports describe localized patterns that seem unusually structured, almost architectural in their arrangement. For example, clusters of icebergs or rock formations aligned along straight axes or concentric patterns suggest more than natural randomness. Scholars have posited that these arrangements could correspond to markers, alignments, or symbolic indicators left intentionally. The Antarctic Beacon, designed to integrate with its environment, could produce such patterns unintentionally or intentionally, influencing explorers' perceptions and recordings without their full comprehension. These environmental traces serve as subtle testimony to the Templars' advanced understanding of natural and artificial design, blending preservation with communication. Several notable voyages provide particularly compelling cases. Reports from early 18th century expeditions describe encountering unusual topographical features that are otherwise absent from contemporary charts. Some mention elevated ice structures resembling pyramidal shapes, while others describe elongated rock ridges appearing geometrically aligned over distances spanning kilometers. While these descriptions often were discounted at the time, in hindsight they align with the kind of durable, precise construction that the Templars could have undertaken, especially if the goal was to create a beacon readable over time rather than visible to casual observation. The recurrence of such observations across independent expeditions strengthens the argument that these features were not merely coincidental but possibly traces of a deliberate, long-term installation. Interpretation of these reports has been complicated by the combination of environmental change and limited navigational knowledge. Ice sheets shift, glaciers move, and snow accumulation can obscure or alter the appearance of any constructed features. Early explorers lacked precise measurement tools, making accurate recording difficult. Despite this, multiple independent reports of anomalies, geometric formations, or unusual reflections suggest consistency beyond error or imagination. The beacon, if present, would be designed to account for these natural dynamics, emphasizing permanence in placement and alignment rather than relying solely on visual clarity. In other words, it was a structure intended to survive extreme conditions while communicating subtly, resilient enough to persist across centuries and shifts in the environment. The influence of these potential beacon traces extends beyond physical and visual observations. Some explorers documented feelings of disorientation, intuition, or unexplained attraction to specific locations, suggesting a psychological dimension to the environment. While modern interpretations might attribute this to natural phenomena, magnetic anomalies, or mental projection, it is also plausible that the Templars integrated subtle markers intended to guide or influence perception. Whether through alignment with celestial bodies, reflective patterns, or symbolic placement of stones and ice, the beacon may have been designed to signal significance even to those uninitiated in its language. In this sense, the Antarctic Beacon functions not only as a physical repository but as a cognitive and symbolic structure, capable of influencing observers indirectly across time. Beyond anecdotal accounts, some early modern maps reveal inconsistencies with known geography, particularly in southern latitudes. Coastlines, mountain ranges, and islands appear where later surveys confirm nothing exists, or features are exaggerated and misrepresented. While these could be errors, they may also indicate the existence of markers or structures whose significance was partially understood but poorly recorded by explorers. The Templars' attention to encoding knowledge across multiple dimensions, cartographic, geometric, symbolic, means that maps themselves could contain layers of hidden information, indirectly pointing to the beacon. Early modern exploration journals, when read in this light, are not merely geographic records but partial attempts to record encounters with preserved and encoded Templar knowledge, even if the authors did not understand what they were seeing. The Antarctic Beacon, in this context, becomes both an objective and a framework for understanding these explorations. It represents the intersection of practical navigation, encoded knowledge, and symbolic intention. The traces reported by early explorers, light reflections, geometric formations, aligned rocks, and anomalous ice structures, may be remnants of deliberate human action, designed to endure centuries and communicate across time. The fact that such features were noted, even indirectly, suggests that the beacon was successful in preserving its presence despite environmental change and the passage of centuries. It demonstrates the Templars' mastery of long-term strategy, environmental integration, and encoded communication, creating a structure that could survive without requiring contemporary comprehension. The Templars' reputation for secrecy and innovation extended beyond their martial and spiritual pursuits into realms that are often overlooked: engineering, geometry, and encoded knowledge. If they indeed constructed a beacon in Antarctica, it would have required sophisticated understanding not only of the physical environment but of methods to preserve information, communicate across time, and ensure resilience in the harshest conditions. The idea that the beacon itself was a repository of hidden knowledge implies that the Templars employed technologies and techniques far ahead of their contemporaries, integrating principles of geometry, optics, navigation, and perhaps even early mechanical devices to create a structure capable of enduring centuries. Their mastery of such methods was informed by centuries of accumulated wisdom, experience with fortified architecture, and access to esoteric traditions preserved through monastic networks and interactions with other cultures during the Crusades. Central to the beacon's design would have been geometry and alignment. The Templars were well-versed in sacred geometry, understanding that certain shapes, angles, and ratios could serve both practical and symbolic purposes. Circles, triangles, and precise alignments could encode information about celestial positions, distances, or directions, forming a language that only initiates could decipher. At the Antarctic site, large-scale formations of stone, ice, or earth could serve as markers, visible from specific angles or under certain lighting conditions. These structures might not only guide observers across the landscape but also function as a record of astronomical knowledge, ensuring that the beacon remained a multidimensional tool for navigation, study, and symbolic transmission of wisdom. The ability to integrate these geometric principles into construction demonstrates the Templars' understanding of both the physical and metaphysical dimensions of design. Optical technology may also have played a role in the beacon's function. Reports from explorers and researchers hint at the presence of reflective surfaces, light patterns, or unusual visual phenomena in extreme latitudes. The Templars may have utilized polished metals, crystal lenses, or mirrors to create signals that could be observed from a distance or interpreted only under specific conditions. These optical devices could serve multiple purposes: guiding travelers, marking alignment with celestial bodies, or conveying encoded messages in patterns of light. In an environment as extreme as Antarctica, where visibility is often limited and the landscape can be deceptive, such innovations would provide both practical utility and a means of encoding information that could survive centuries without degradation. The careful combination of optics and geometry suggests an integrated technological approach, blending perception, mathematics, and environmental awareness. The preservation of knowledge at the beacon would have required methods to withstand environmental extremes. Antarctic temperatures, ice movements, and snow accumulation present formidable challenges to any structure or repository. The Templars may have employed engineering techniques designed to mitigate these risks, such as raised platforms, insulated chambers, or subterranean storage protected by ice and stone. Materials selected for durability, combined with strategic placement in naturally stable areas, could ensure the survival of encoded artifacts or manuscripts. Even minor features, like grooves in stone or patterns carved into ice-resistant rock, could preserve directional or symbolic information over centuries. The intersection of environmental engineering and knowledge preservation underscores the sophistication of the Templars' planning, reflecting an awareness of natural forces and their potential impact on the longevity of information. Encoded writing and symbolic systems were likely critical components of the beacon. The Templars were known to employ ciphered texts, allegorical inscriptions, and complex diagrams in their manuscripts and architecture. At the Antarctic site, such encoding could appear in multiple forms: inscriptions on stone, geometric arrangements of markers, or alignment with natural features that function as a living code. This multilayered encoding would allow knowledge to survive even if some elements were destroyed, lost, or misinterpreted. Observers lacking the requisite training would perceive only the superficial aspects of the site: rocks, ice, or unusual formations, while those with initiation and understanding could decode a rich matrix of information, combining mathematics, astronomy, and symbolic instruction into a coherent system. The beacon's encoding strategy exemplifies the Templars' long-term vision, ensuring both preservation and selective accessibility. The integration of celestial observation into the beacon's function highlights the Templars' expertise in astronomy and navigation. Alignments with solstices, equinoxes, or specific star positions could serve as both practical markers and symbolic statements. Certain structures could cast shadows at precise times of the year, indicate latitude, or signal alignment with distant landmarks. The extreme latitude of Antarctica offers unique astronomical opportunities. Extended periods of daylight and darkness, polar stars visible year-round, and a stable horizon line that could enhance the accuracy of celestial measurements. These conditions would allow the beacon to function as a temporal and spatial guide, encoding not only geographic information but cycles of cosmic significance. By integrating astronomy into design, the Templars transformed the beacon into a multidimensional tool capable of bridging terrestrial and celestial knowledge. Mechanical elements may have also been incorporated into the site. While concrete evidence is lacking, historical accounts suggest that the Templars were familiar with simple mechanical devices, water flow systems, and levers to enhance construction and convey information. At the beacon, mechanical elements could serve as timekeeping devices, signaling mechanisms, or even protective features. For example, subtle levers or weight systems could trigger changes in visual markers under specific conditions, creating dynamic signals that would only be observed at particular times of day or under certain astronomical alignments. This dynamic aspect would increase the beacon's sophistication, ensuring that only those with understanding and patience could interpret its signals fully. The combination of mechanics, geometry, and optics illustrates the Templars' interdisciplinary approach to knowledge preservation, blending multiple forms of expertise into a single, resilient system. Hydrology and ice management may have been additional considerations. The movement of glaciers, the flow of meltwater, and snow accumulation can obscure or damage static structures. The Templars, with their experience in fortification and water management in castles and monastic complexes, could have applied similar principles at the Antarctic site. Channels, drainage systems, or subtle topographical modifications might have been used to protect key markers or inscriptions from natural erosion, while also guiding observers along intended paths. These adaptations demonstrate foresight and practical engineering skill, integrating environmental understanding into the preservation of both physical and encoded knowledge. The beacon, therefore, functions not just as a marker, but as a carefully engineered system designed to endure and communicate despite environmental challenges. The transmission of knowledge from the beacon also likely involved symbolic and mnemonic techniques. The Templars' use of allegory, ritual, and encoded instruction suggests that the site itself could serve as a teaching tool. Initiates visiting the beacon would encounter visual cues, geometric arrangements, and environmental markers that conveyed lessons in navigation, astronomy, geometry, or spiritual understanding. Each interaction with the site would reinforce knowledge through experience, observation, and interpretation, rather than through written explanation alone. This approach ensures that the knowledge preserved at the beacon remains active and interpretable, emphasizing understanding over rote memorization. The Templars' foresight in encoding practical, symbolic, and pedagogical functions into the site reflects a holistic approach to knowledge preservation. The choice of materials for construction further emphasizes the beacon's durability. Stone, metals, and other resilient elements could withstand the extreme cold and shifting ice, while reflective surfaces or polished metals could provide optical signaling. The selection of natural features, outcrops, ridges, and stable terrain would enhance the longevity and visibility of markers. Even minor modifications to the landscape, such as carved grooves or subtle mounds, could persist for centuries, providing reference points for those capable of interpretation. The combination of natural and artificial elements demonstrates an understanding of environmental forces, durability, and the principles of long-term preservation, ensuring that the beacon remains functional and interpretable even after centuries of exposure. Integration of multiple sensory inputs may have enhanced the beacon's effectiveness. Beyond visual and geometric cues, The Templars may have incorporated auditory, tactile, or spatial signals to guide perception and interpretation. The arrangement of rocks or ice could produce echoes, vibrations, or subtle environmental feedback, reinforcing orientation or marking specific alignments. Tactile elements, such as raised carvings or textured surfaces, could provide additional encoding for those trained to recognize them. This multisensory approach would increase the resilience of knowledge, allowing it to be perceived and interpreted in multiple ways, ensuring survival even under partial degradation or environmental change. The Antarctic Beacon, with its combination of geometry, optics, mechanics, environmental engineering, celestial alignment, and multisensory encoding, represents a pinnacle of Templar ingenuity. It illustrates a comprehensive understanding of how knowledge can be preserved and communicated across centuries and extreme conditions. Each element of the site, physical structures, symbolic markers, reflective surfaces, and environmental modifications, works together to form an integrated system capable of guiding, teaching, and signaling to those who approach with understanding and insight. The complexity of these technologies highlights the Templars' foresight, emphasizing endurance, security, and selective accessibility as central to their preservation strategy. In essence, the technologies and methods embedded in the beacon transform it into a multidimensional archive. It is simultaneously physical, symbolic, educational, and practical. The Templars' integration of geometry, optics, mechanics, and environmental engineering ensures that the site remains interpretable even centuries later, while also encoding knowledge in a way that protects it from casual discovery. The beacon's design exemplifies the Templars' vision of knowledge as sacred, enduring, and active, a structure meant to interact with observers, challenge perception, and preserve understanding across time and distance. Through these innovations, the Antarctic Beacon becomes not only a signal or repository, but a living testament to human ingenuity, discipline, and foresight, embodying the enduring legacy of the Knights Templar. The lure of hidden knowledge and lost treasures has driven explorers for centuries, but by the 19th and early 20th centuries, the idea of discovering the Templar Antarctic Beacon became more than a whispered legend. Early modern explorers, driven by a combination of scientific curiosity, national ambition, and fascination with ancient mysteries, ventured further into the southern latitudes than ever before. While much of their attention was initially focused on charting coastlines, mapping ice flows, and understanding the harsh climate, a growing number of adventurers began to notice anomalies that could not be easily explained. Reports of unusual formations, geometric alignments, and optical phenomena sparked speculation among certain circles that something far older, far more intentional, might lie hidden beneath the ice. These expeditions, often fraught with peril, mark the first modern attempts to locate or interpret traces of the Templars' most enigmatic project, blending exploration, archaeology, and the pursuit of esoteric knowledge. One of the defining challenges for these early expeditions was the extreme environment itself. Antarctica, with its relentless cold, shifting ice, and unpredictable storms, posed physical threats that could overwhelm even the most prepared teams. Expeditions often relied on wooden ships, basic navigation instruments, and limited supplies, making any prolonged investigation extraordinarily dangerous. Despite these challenges, explorers reported patterns in the landscape that suggested deliberate construction. Lines of rocks, mounds aligned with celestial events, or anomalies in ice formations that seemed too regular to be natural. While many scientists and naval officers dismissed these observations as optical illusions or environmental quirks, a growing number of enthusiasts began to interpret them as signs of the beacon, reinforcing the idea that the Templars had anticipated not only the passage of time but the persistence of the Antarctic environment as a medium for preservation. Detailed logs from these expeditions reveal that observers were struck by the interplay of light, shadow, and terrain. In some accounts, explorers noted that the sun, low on the horizon, would cast shadows from ice ridges or rock formations in patterns that seemed intentional. Some formations appeared aligned to the solstice or to specific constellations, creating a sense of order in an otherwise chaotic landscape. The precision required for such alignments suggests deliberate planning, rather than coincidence. These observations, though fragmentary and often incomplete due to weather constraints, hint at the possibility that the Templars' knowledge of geometry and astronomy was encoded in large-scale markers visible even centuries after their construction. Explorers were often left with a mixture of awe and confusion, perceiving the traces of human design, yet lacking the tools or understanding to interpret their full significance. Optical phenomena also played a significant role in shaping the impressions of early modern explorers. Sunlight reflecting off ice sheets, unusual refractions in cold air, and the presence of mirrored surfaces created effects that could be interpreted as signals or markers. In some journals, observers described fleeting flashes of light on the horizon, sometimes aligned with rock formations or ridges. While the precise origin of these phenomena is difficult to verify, it is plausible that the Templars employed reflective surfaces, polished metals, or strategically positioned ice structures as part of the beacon's design. Such optical elements would have enhanced the site's visibility under specific conditions while remaining largely invisible or inscrutable to casual observers. The interplay of environment, technology, and perception illustrates the sophisticated planning that may have underpinned the beacon's construction. Reports from these early expeditions also include descriptions of structures partially buried under ice or snow. Explorers encountered rock arrangements that seemed unnaturally regular, depressions that suggested substructures, and elevated formations that hinted at deliberate design. Some noted patterns that appeared circular or triangular, forms consistent with Templar geometric encoding. While these features were often dismissed by mainstream science as natural anomalies, they consistently reappear in multiple expedition accounts, suggesting a continuity that cannot be easily attributed to coincidence. The explorers' observations, though limited by environmental constraints and technological limitations, provide tantalizing evidence of a human presence, long concealed, that may have shaped the Antarctic landscape in subtle but enduring ways. Navigation and mapping also played a crucial role in the first modern investigations of the beacon. Many expeditions were tasked with creating accurate charts of southern coastlines, ice flows, and mountain ranges, providing an opportunity to record anomalies in detail. Explorers noted unusual elevations, ridges, and outcroppings that aligned with celestial markers or geographic axes, sometimes correlating with earlier anecdotal reports. These observations allowed for tentative mapping of patterns that might represent the remnants of the beacon, offering the first attempts to interpret its scale, orientation, and purpose. While the precision of these maps was limited by technology and environmental hazards, they laid the groundwork for later, more systematic expeditions, and hinted at the possibility of an intentional human imprint on the frozen continent. Some expeditions reported phenomena that suggested an interaction between the beacon and environmental cycles. Observers noted the movement of shadows, ice flows, and reflective surfaces in patterns that seemed predictable, as if the site had been designed to communicate under specific conditions. These cyclical patterns may have been intended as long-term signals or markers, readable only by those equipped with the knowledge to interpret them. The idea that the beacon could function not merely as a static structure but as an active interface with the environment underscores the sophistication of its design. It also explains why early modern explorers, lacking Templar instruction, could perceive its presence but struggled to understand its purpose. Surviving accounts from these expeditions reveal a mixture of scientific rigor and mystical interpretation. Some explorers approached the anomalies with skepticism, attributing them to natural processes or optical illusions, while others speculated about lost civilizations, hidden knowledge, or remnants of ancient societies. The persistence of unusual formations, reflective phenomena, and geometric alignments across multiple journeys lent credibility to the idea that something deliberate had been constructed. These dual interpretations, scientific and mystical, reflect the broader tension in the study of the beacon, highlighting the difficulty of reconciling empirical observation with the possibility of intentionally encoded, esoteric knowledge. Expeditions also faced logistical and psychological challenges that shaped their understanding of the beacon. Long periods of isolation, extreme cold, and treacherous terrain created conditions in which perception and judgment could be affected. Reports of hallucinations, disorientation, or unusual sensory experiences were sometimes recorded alongside observations of geometric anomalies or optical phenomena. While these accounts must be approached cautiously, they may also hint at the psychological dimension of the beacon itself. The Templars, aware of the interplay between environment, perception, and cognition, may have designed aspects of the site to influence observers subtly, guiding interpretation and encouraging careful observation over time. In this sense, the beacon functioned not only as a physical marker but as a psychological interface, shaping the perception of those who encountered it. Several expeditions reported attempts to excavate or investigate partially buried formations. These attempts were often limited by harsh conditions, but even brief exposure revealed evidence of deliberate construction. Carved stones, aligned markers, or structural depressions that resisted natural explanation. The persistence of these features suggests that the beacon, if it existed, was built with extraordinary durability in mind, capable of surviving centuries of ice movement, snow accumulation, and extreme weather. The engineering and planning required to achieve such endurance points to a sophisticated understanding of environmental forces, material properties, and construction techniques far beyond what one might expect from a medieval organization. These early modern observations hint at the scale and ambition of the Templars' design, emphasizing foresight, resilience, and the integration of multiple disciplines. The reports also reveal a broader cultural fascination with the idea of the beacon. In scientific societies, private correspondence, and exploratory journals, speculation about the origins and purpose of the anomalies was widespread. Some suggested connections to the Templars, invoking the order's known history of secrecy, engineering prowess, and long-term planning. Others proposed that the site was the work of a lost civilization, predating known history. Regardless of interpretation, the recurring focus on geometric patterns, celestial alignments, and unusual environmental phenomena reflects a recognition that these features were exceptional. The beacon became a symbol of human ingenuity and endurance, bridging the gap between historical knowledge, myth, and empirical observation. By synthesizing these accounts, it becomes clear that early modern expeditions were encountering more than random ice formations or natural oddities. They were, consciously or not, engaging with a legacy of careful planning, encoded knowledge, and durable design. The Antarctic Beacon, constructed with precision, symbolism, and environmental awareness, exerted subtle influence on observers even centuries after its creation. Its traces, geometric alignments, reflective surfaces, and anomalous formations provided clues to its purpose and function, inviting interpretation by those equipped with knowledge, patience, and insight. The cumulative reports of these expeditions form a mosaic of evidence, suggesting that the beacon was not a mere legend but a sophisticated, enduring installation with practical, symbolic, and psychological dimensions. Accounts from early expeditions into the frozen expanses of Antarctica frequently hint at anomalies that defy simple explanation, leaving explorers both awed and unsettled. Among the most tantalizing are reports of artifacts, inscriptions, and formations that suggest deliberate human intervention, hinting at the survival of knowledge or structures that may date back centuries. These findings, often fragmentary and obscured by snow and ice, appear in journals, sketches, and maps, offering glimpses of something far older than the expeditions themselves. The possibility that these artifacts are remnants of the Templar Antarctic Beacon has fueled speculation and mystery, as the objects and symbols encountered suggest a sophistication and intentionality that transcends casual construction or natural formation. They challenge conventional assumptions about human presence in extreme latitudes and hint at a continuity of purpose, encoded in forms both subtle and enduring. One of the recurring types of anomalies reported by explorers is geometric formations in stone or ice. Observers often noted depressions, raised mounds, or alignments that resembled patterns familiar from Templar symbolism, such as triangles, circles, or interlocking shapes. In some cases, these formations appeared over vast areas, suggesting large-scale planning and precise measurement. Explorers frequently struggled to reconcile these observations with natural processes. The regularity and consistency implied human agency. While skeptics might attribute these to coincidence or mirage effects, The repeated independent documentation by multiple expeditions across decades lends weight to the idea that these features were intentionally constructed. They may have served as markers, encoded signals, or symbolic references, forming part of a broader system of knowledge preservation embedded within the Antarctic landscape. In addition to physical formations, explorers reported finding objects embedded in ice or partially exposed by glacial movements. These artifacts varied widely, including metal fragments, carved stones, and objects resembling ancient instruments or tools. While environmental conditions often rendered these items unrecognizable, their mere existence in such a remote, harsh setting is striking. Some suggested connections to the Templars, invoking the order's known history of secrecy, engineering prowess, and long-term planning. Others proposed that the site was the work of a lost civilization, predating known history. Regardless of interpretation, the recurring focus on geometric patterns, celestial alignments, and unusual environmental phenomena reflects a recognition that these features were exceptional. The beacon became a symbol of human ingenuity and endurance, bridging the gap between historical knowledge, myth, and empirical observation. By synthesizing these accounts, it becomes clear that early modern expeditions were encountering more than random ice formations or natural oddities. They were, consciously or not, engaging with a legacy of careful planning, encoded knowledge, and durable design. The Antarctic Beacon, constructed with precision, symbolism, and environmental awareness, exerted subtle influence on observers even centuries after its creation. Its traces, geometric alignments, reflective surfaces, and anomalous formations provided clues to its purpose and function, inviting interpretation by those equipped with knowledge, patience, and insight. The cumulative reports of these expeditions form a mosaic of evidence, suggesting that the beacon was not a mere legend but a sophisticated, enduring installation with practical, symbolic, and psychological dimensions. Accounts from early expeditions into the frozen expanses of Antarctica frequently hint at anomalies that defy simple explanation, leaving explorers both awed and unsettled. Among the most tantalizing are reports of artifacts, inscriptions, and formations that suggest deliberate human intervention, hinting at the survival of knowledge or structures that may date back centuries. These findings, often fragmentary and obscured by snow and ice, appear in journals, sketches, and maps, offering glimpses of something far older than the expeditions themselves. The possibility that these artifacts are remnants of the Templar Antarctic Beacon has fueled speculation and mystery, as the objects and symbols encountered suggest a sophistication and intentionality that transcends casual construction or natural formation. They challenge conventional assumptions about human presence in extreme latitudes and hint at a continuity of purpose, encoded in forms both subtle and enduring. One of the recurring types of anomalies reported by explorers is geometric formations in stone or ice. Observers often noted depressions, raised mounds, or alignments that resembled patterns familiar from Templar symbolism, such as triangles, circles, or interlocking shapes. In some cases, these formations appeared over vast areas, suggesting large-scale planning and precise measurement. Explorers frequently struggled to reconcile these observations with natural processes. The regularity and consistency implied human agency. While skeptics might attribute these to coincidence or mirage effects, the repeated independent documentation by multiple expeditions across decades lends weight to the idea that these features were intentionally constructed. They may have served as markers, encoded signals, or symbolic references, forming part of a broader system of knowledge preservation embedded within the Antarctic landscape. In addition to physical formations, explorers reported finding objects embedded in ice or partially exposed by glacial movements. These artifacts varied widely, including metal fragments, carved stones, and objects resembling ancient instruments or tools. While environmental conditions often rendered these items unrecognizable, their mere existence in such a remote, harsh setting is striking. Some reports describe polished surfaces, engraved symbols, or constructions that suggest deliberate shaping rather than accidental deposition. The potential connection to Templar craftsmanship is speculative but plausible, given the order's known proficiency in metalwork, geometry, and sacred symbolism. These artifacts, enduring for centuries under layers of ice, imply both careful preservation and a long-term plan for survival, consistent with the Templars' methods of hiding and encoding valuable knowledge. Inscriptions and markings present an even more enigmatic aspect of the discoveries. Journals occasionally mention symbols carved into stone or etched into ice, often resembling runes, crosses, or complex geometric patterns. The locations of these markings were sometimes aligned with natural features or celestial events, implying that they were designed to communicate information under specific conditions. Explorers frequently attempted to record these inscriptions, producing sketches or notes, but the difficulty of accessing the sites and the obscuring effects of snow and frost limited accurate documentation. Nevertheless, the persistence of such symbols across multiple expeditions suggests intentionality, hinting at encoded knowledge that could be interpreted by those with the requisite understanding. The similarity of some symbols to Templar motifs has led researchers to consider a connection, positing that these inscriptions form part of a long-standing system of guidance, preservation, and communication. Several expeditions also documented anomalies in natural formations that seemed to mimic human construction. Rock outcroppings and ice ridges sometimes appeared in configurations resembling walls, steps, or platforms. Observers noted alignments that corresponded to cardinal directions, solstice sunrises, or the positions of certain stars. These formations could serve multiple purposes: as reference points for navigation, as encoded markers for those trained to read them, or as signals embedded into the environment for future discovery. The integration of these features with the natural landscape demonstrates an understanding of environmental permanence, suggesting that the creators of such markers anticipated the challenges posed by glacial movement and severe weather. The result is a system where natural and artificial elements coexist, producing a durable, interpretable record accessible only to those equipped with knowledge and patience. Some of the most intriguing reports involve metallic or reflective artifacts. Early explorers noted objects that gleamed in sunlight, casting flashes or reflections across ice and snow. In one account, an observer described a series of polished surfaces arranged in alignment with the horizon, producing patterns of light at specific times of day. While these reports are anecdotal, they align with theories that the Templars used optical devices, polished metals, or mirrors as part of the beacon's design. These reflective artifacts could serve practical purposes, such as signaling or navigation, while simultaneously encoding knowledge for those who understood the system. The combination of geometry, light, and environmental awareness demonstrates a level of technological sophistication that would be extraordinary for the medieval period, yet consistent with the Templars' known expertise and strategic foresight. There are also reports of organic or ceremonial remnants, though less common due to the destructive nature of the Antarctic environment. Some explorers noted traces of wooden frameworks, fabric fragments, or organic markers that appeared deliberately positioned. While decay and ice movement would have obliterated much of this material, its occasional preservation suggests that the beacon may have incorporated multiple materials to encode knowledge or serve ritual functions. These remnants, while subtle, indicate that the creators were aware of the challenges posed by the environment and employed a diversity of methods to ensure the transmission of information across centuries. The integration of multiple mediums, stone, metal, ice, and organic materials, reflects a holistic approach to preservation, blending durability with interpretive depth. The interpretations of these anomalies vary widely. Some explorers and researchers viewed them as evidence of lost civilizations or pre-existing cultures, while others proposed that they were constructed by secretive medieval orders such as the Templars. The alignment with celestial phenomena, geometric sophistication, and symbolic resonance with known Templar motifs strengthen the latter hypothesis. However, due to the fragmentary nature of the evidence and the extreme conditions, definitive conclusions remain elusive. The anomalies function as both physical and symbolic traces, leaving room for interpretation while reinforcing the narrative of a hidden, enduring system designed to preserve knowledge in a remote, hostile environment. Psychological responses to these findings are also noteworthy. Explorers frequently described feelings of awe, disorientation, or a profound sense of the unknown when encountering anomalous formations or inscriptions. These responses suggest that the beacon may have been designed, consciously or not, to create an emotional and cognitive impact. The combination of environmental extremity, geometric precision, and symbolic encoding can influence perception, encouraging careful observation, reflection, and interpretation. In this sense, the beacon functions not only as a physical repository, but as an experiential system, guiding those who encounter it toward insight through the interaction of observation, cognition, and environment. Several expeditions attempted to document or replicate the anomalies through sketches, measurements, and partial excavations. These efforts, while limited by environmental conditions, provided valuable records that persist in libraries, archives, and private collections. Comparative analysis of these records reveals patterns: repeated geometric arrangements, consistent alignments with celestial markers, and recurring symbolic motifs. This consistency suggests that the artifacts and inscriptions were not random, but part of an intentional, enduring system of communication and preservation. Even if the creators anticipated centuries of concealment, the traces they left behind were sufficient to guide careful observers toward understanding, highlighting both foresight and discipline in the original design.